In the kingdom of Arvania, a grand divine prophecy descends upon the young daughter of a prestigious marquis family. The unyielding mandate decrees she shall become the consort to the future ruler Prince Regulus de Arvania. The heavy weight of this preordained destiny falls squarely upon the shoulders of Kira Six Shandies. A stunned silence washes over Kira as the inescapable reality of her royal future begins to set in. 10 years later, a fiercely determined Kira stands before her father and demands the annulment of her engagement to the prince. Shocked by her sudden rebellion, her father sharply questions if she is truly serious about abandoning her royal future. Burning with defiance, Kira passionately declares her absolute desire to shatter her preordained destiny and forge her own path. A heavy silence stretches between them as the weight of her bold declaration hangs in the room. Moved by the earnest plea of his beloved only daughter, the Marquis solemnly vows to grant her dangerous wish. Overwhelmed with profound gratitude, Kira profusely thanks her father for supporting her defiance of the royal family. A triumphant smile graces her features as she proudly claims this monumental victory over her own fate. Since that decisive moment, Kira's entire world shifts as she completely discards her life as a traditional noble lady. Her father takes radical steps by passing the Marquis household to another and considering the total relinquishment of his noble title. Resolving to follow her father's honorable legacy, Kira aims to become a fierce temple knight who serves the gods directly. She calculates her moves perfectly, knowing the temple's sacred authority remains completely independent from both royal and noble power. Serving the holy temple quickly becomes her ultimate impenetrable shield to protect herself from the royal family's grasp. Sweating from rigorous physical training, Kira heartily praises her fellow knight Alan for his excellent sword work. Impressed by her relentless growth, Alan admits he initially underestimated her but marvels at her newfound combat strength. Grinning with competitive fire, Kira playfully dismisses his big talk and vows she will never lose to him in battle. The fierce sparring match continues in silence as neither knight is willing to yield an inch. When Alan questions her status as the prince's fiancée, Kira calmly reveals her father is actively annulling the royal contract. Alan struggles to comprehend her radical choice to throw away the chance of becoming queen just to bleed as a knight. With a hint of genuine concern, he gently reminds her she does not have to force herself down this brutal path. Curious about the intense drive pushing her forward, Alan bluntly asks if she truly hates the prince that much. Kira casually brushes off the idea of marriage, hinting she might only consider it for someone truly exceptional. She sharply warns Alan that anyone trying to court her would be dangerously opposing the entire royal family. Caught completely off guard by her intense words, a flustered Alan stammers nervously as Kira sharply calls his name. Sweating under her intense gaze, he quickly deflects the tension and loudly suggests they discuss the matter another time. She looks at him knowingly, quietly acknowledging she understands exactly the unspoken feelings he is trying to convey. Silent memories unexpectedly resurface of eyes filled with painful, unrequited feelings for someone she could never hope to reach. Suddenly, a commanding voice cuts through the air, demanding to know if the woman before him is Kira Six Shandies. A tense pause follows the sudden question as an imposing aura fills the training grounds. Declaring he is there on official business, Prince Regulus shatters the peaceful atmosphere of the courtyard. A terrified silence falls over Kira as she realizes the prince himself has unexpectedly stopped by. With piercing intensity, the prince announces he has already heard the shocking news regarding the annulment of their engagement. Dismissive of fate, he casually admits he also harbored heavy doubts about a marriage dictated by a so-called divine prophecy. He critically eyes her combat gear, confessing he never expected the wild rumors of her actually becoming a knight to be true. Paralyzed by his overwhelming aura, Kira silently curses her terrible luck and internalizes her dread for this truly frightening man. Completely unfazed by her obvious hostility, Prince Regulus leans in close and boldly declares her to be a highly interesting woman. Smiling dangerously, the prince praises her formidable strength and claims the blood-stained path of a knight suits her perfectly. Prince Regulus praises his fiancée's gallant nature with an enigmatic smile. Kira flinches in surprise as the prince makes a bold and unexpected approach. Regulus firmly grasps Kira in a sudden display of unyielding royal dominance. The prince remarks that she is truly a strange woman, his gaze piercing through her defenses. Regulus openly admits that she completely intrigues him, entirely shifting the dynamics of their encounter. Internally panicked, Kira desperately wishes to avoid any further involvement with the formidable royal. Contrary to her true feelings, Kira finds herself hopelessly swept up in the prince's relentless pace. The scene shifts as the overwhelming reality of her changing destiny continues to unfold. Kira struggles to maintain her composure as the royal pressures mount around her. She silently pushes forward, determined to carve out her own path despite the chaos. A tense atmosphere settles over the kingdom as unexpected developments begin to take shape. Someone firmly demands that she stay with him, closing any immediate avenues of escape. Kira questions why this version of the prince desires her when the previous one completely despised her. Suddenly, a prominent figure steps forward to formally address the daughter of the Marquis. A suitor shockingly drops to one knee and passionately declares his love while begging for her hand in marriage. Kira stands completely stunned by the unexpected and overwhelming suddenness of the marriage proposal. The surrounding crowd joyfully erupts into applause, showering the newly matched couple with warm congratulations. It perfectly resembles a flawless happy ending that everyone openly acknowledges and celebrates. However, a dark and ominous shadow suddenly looms over the picture-perfect romantic scene. Kira hesitates internally, unable to shake the creeping suspicion that something is horribly wrong. A mysterious voice abruptly cuts through the illusion, bluntly stating that something feels entirely off. The strange entity mockingly questions if Kira is truly enjoying this fabricated, joyful reality. Startled violently out of her trance, Kira gasps in pure shock at the sudden, chilling intrusion. The intruder reveals himself as Ruji the Devil, tauntingly asking if she had completely forgotten his existence. Kira stares in absolute disbelief as Ruji notes that the passage of time has eroded her crucial memories. With a sinister smirk, the powerful devil vows to forcefully drag the buried truth back into her mind. A sudden surge of dark energy envelopes the space as Ruji begins to warp her entire perception. The beautiful illusion of her happy ending shatters violently under the devil's overwhelming dark power. Ruji mercilessly drags her consciousness backward to confront the grim, tragic reality of her first life. Trembling with sheer terror, Kira stammers in denial as the horrific memories flood back into her brain. Ruji ruthlessly exposes that her current happy life is actually a second chance bought through a demonic contract. Expecting the absolute worst, Kira asks if he wants her soul, but Ruji quickly dismisses the cliché notion. The devil chillingly clarifies that she has already paid the required price for the currently active contract. He calmly explains that rewriting a life comes with the steep cost of permanently losing a piece of one's heart. Kira desperately searches her mind but simply cannot figure out which specific part of her heart she sacrificed. Ruji finds her utter confusion highly amusing while casually acknowledging her successful new aristocratic life. The devil sharply calls her name, forcing the frightened girl to lock eyes with his piercing demonic gaze. Turning away, Ruji promises to return another day and commands her to think deeply about her choices until then. He leaves her with a haunting ultimatum to decide whether this fabricated existence is truly acceptable to her. Kira is left standing completely alone in the deafening silence, overwhelmed by the shattering revelation of her demonic pact. Haunted by lingering doubts, Kira deeply questions if living this fabricated peaceful life is truly acceptable. Reflecting on her brutal first life filled with harsh queenly education and tearful struggles, she forces a smile and formally accepts the prince's marriage proposal. She vividly remembers how she foolishly believed the world had finally rewarded her relentless personal efforts and immense sacrifices. In stark contrast to the relentless torment of her original timeline, everything in this second life feels suspiciously flawless and effortlessly handed to her. A heavy silence descends as she coldly analyzes the hollow perfection of her current aristocratic surroundings. Though this new version of the prince seemingly showers her with genuine affection, an undeniable darkness festers deep within her wounded heart. For Kira, the agonizing memories of her past suffering completely overshadow the empty romantic gestures presented in this fabricated reality. Boiling with suppressed rage, she ultimately concludes that the man who previously destroyed her life remains utterly and entirely unforgivable. A terrifying realization suddenly strikes her mind as she grasps the true meaning behind the lost fragment of her heart she unknowingly offered to the devil. Slipping from the shadows with a sinister grin, the devil Ruji returns exactly as promised to demand her final fateful answer. He relentlessly presses her to make the ultimate choice regarding whether she will continue living comfortably in this deceptive, dreamlike world. Refusing to be intimidated by the demonic presence, Kira boldly halts Ruji to confirm the exact nature of her sacrificed heart. With unyielding determination blazing in her eyes, she strictly demands that he return the stolen piece of her soul if she correctly identifies it. Amused by her sheer audacity, Ruji leans in closely and dangerously warns her of the catastrophic consequences should she guess incorrectly. Completely unfazed by the threat of total obliteration, Kira fiercely declares she does not mind risking her current identity for the ultimate truth. Erupting into boisterous laughter at her fearless resolve, the powerful devil enthusiastically accepts her high-stakes gamble. Radiating dark anticipation, Ruji theatrically commands Kira to unveil the grand answer she has deduced from her highly fragmented memories. Taking a deep grounding breath, Kira firmly anchors her spirit as she prepares to confront the absolute darkest corners of her own wounded soul. She forcefully declares that the missing piece of her heart is the pure, blinding spirit of vengeance born directly from her profound anger and resentment. A wickedly delighted chuckle escapes the devil's lips as he marvels at the magnificent darkness completely swallowing her once pure soul. Ruji excitedly confirms her chilling deduction is absolutely correct and formally declares her the undeniable victor of their twisted demonic wager. Her restored wrath exploding outward, Kira passionately screams that she can never forgive or accept the brutal injustices inflicted upon her in her original life. She rationalizes her terrifying bloodlust by asserting that her original self was never rewarded, making their current innocence completely irrelevant to her violent desires. Locking her piercing, hateful gaze directly onto the imposing devil, Kira immediately issues a grave and entirely uncompromising request. She shockingly commands Ruji to hurl her straight back to the miserable underground prison of her first torturous timeline. Spitting with utter disgust, she wholly rejects this smooth, fabricated reality, branding it a sickly sweet hell that simply isn't hers to live. Genuinely intrigued by her sheer madness, Ruji curiously questions what she could possibly hope to accomplish by returning to such a hopeless era. Without a single moment of hesitation, Kira coldly states that her ultimate destructive objective has already been firmly and permanently decided. A terrifying aura of absolute malice erupts from her trembling body as she singularly vows to enact merciless, bloody revenge upon her tormentors. Driven entirely by spiteful fury, she insists that even if fatal punishment is impossible, she will absolutely force her enemies to pay in endless agony. Ruji bursts into maniacal laughter, gleefully celebrating the terrifying fact that the fierce, lost spirit of vengeance has fully returned to his contractor. Smirking with vicious intent, Kira fiercely promises to reclaim every last shred of her stolen honor and heavily trampled pride. Dropping her hostility for a brief, cunning moment, she darkly chuckles and plainly asks the devil if she has his official permission to plunge back into the past. Thrilled by the highly entertaining chaos she promises to unleash, Ruji enthusiastically agrees to transport her dark soul back into her original timeline. Raising a strict warning finger, the devil harshly clarifies that this grand decision is devastatingly final and absolutely no further do-overs will ever be granted. He mockingly marvels at her sheer insanity for willingly abandoning the absolute highest peak of a perfect life to violently plunge straight back into rock bottom. With eyes blazing like pure hellfire, Kira furiously rebukes his taunts and declares she does not care whatsoever about the temporary comforts she is throwing away. Reveling in her magnificent descent into utter darkness, Ruji joyously christens her the ultimate villainess, Kira Six Shandies. Harnessing his immense demonic power, the devil loudly proclaims he will grant her twisted wish and thoroughly shatter the god-ordained fate of becoming King Regulus' consort. Fully embracing her dark and bloody rebirth, Kira viciously curses her divine prophecy while standing completely ready to burn her entire world down to ashes. Kira bravely reflects on the shocking reality that she has officially redone her rewritten life. The dark and gritty atmosphere of her original tragic timeline violently begins to manifest before her eyes. A grim underground prison cell slowly materializes from the absolute deepest shadows of her restored past. Slipping smoothly from the darkness, Ruji chuckles sinisterly as he warmly welcomes her back to the bleak cell. The imposing devil curiously asks Kira how it truly feels to inhabit this miserable state once again. Smiling with terrifying joy, Kira fiercely declares that returning to this wretched rock bottom is absolutely the best. Ruji laughs maniacally while enthusiastically agreeing that the dark dungeon perfectly suits a newly reborn villainess. Bound tightly by heavy chains, Kira admits that this prison forcefully summons the tragic memories of her first life. Her mind instantly flashes back to a grand royal coronation where cheering crowds celebrated King Regulus ascending the throne. The glorious and triumphant procession of the newly crowned king marches majestically through the jubilant kingdom. Proud citizens loudly and passionately chant King Regulus' sacred name as he officially assumes his supreme royal authority. Standing elegantly in her magnificent formal attire, Kira patiently waits to perform her sacred ceremonial duties. An attendant respectfully requests Lady Kira to step forward and present the ceremonial bouquet directly to His Majesty. Approaching with utmost grace, Kira respectfully bows her head and formally addresses the imposing new monarch. She gracefully offers the vibrant flowers while sincerely congratulating the glorious reigning son of the entire kingdom. Instead of accepting her beautiful gesture, King Regulus coldly and deliberately ignores his loyal fiancée entirely. A suffocating tension instantly fills the massive hall as her sincere floral offering goes completely unacknowledged. The arrogant young king simply walks right past her without offering even a single passing glance. Kira stands frozen in silent humiliation as the crushing reality of his cruel public rejection thoroughly sinks in. The massive royal court silently witnesses the agonizing distance deliberately placed between the reigning monarch and his bride. A deep sorrow severely clouds her beautiful eyes as she bravely tries to mask her profound internal pain. She tragically recalls that her strained relationship with the cruel king was never actually good even a single time. Recognizing the incredibly harsh truth, Kira mentally accepts that her royal fiancé utterly and completely despises her. Though she heavily blames her own perceived inadequacies, she still completely fails to understand the true reason behind his hatred. Suddenly, a stunning woman named Yuktya confidently steps forward to offer her own cheerful royal congratulations. The surrounding aristocratic crowd immediately whispers in pure awe as they marvel at the incredibly wonderful new arrival. Commanding absolute silence, King Regulus suddenly raises his authoritative voice to address the entire gathered court. He shockingly proclaims to the masses that he will take Saint Yuktya Lamine as his one and only rightful queen. The entire grand hall instantly erupts into utter chaos and sheer disbelief at the unprecedented royal declaration. King Regulus proudly holds the radiant Saint Yuktya close while completely discarding his actual destined fiancée. A panicked noble desperately questions what will happen to Lady Kira, who was officially chosen by the divine prophecy. Mocking the sacred decree, Regulus arrogantly questions why a mere prophecy should ever force him to marry Kira. Turning his cruel gaze toward Kira, he harshly demands to know if she truly believes herself worthy of the throne. Gathering her shattered courage, Kira desperately braces herself to defend her absolute lifelong dedication to the crown. She passionately argues that she has ruthlessly studied and perfectly cultivated herself solely to become his queen. Pointing an accusatory finger, Regulus furiously commands Kira 6 shandies to listen very carefully to his final decree. He viciously condemns her perceived arrogance for daring to claim she deserves to be his queen. With ruthless finality, the tyrannical king officially and loudly annuls their sacred engagement right then and there. Kira gasps in absolute horror as her entire predetermined future violently shatters into a million pieces. To add ultimate insult to injury, Regulus cruelly decrees he will generously take her in merely as his lowly concubine. Trembling under the crushing weight of the king's decree, Kira desperately stammers that such a life-altering decision isn't something she can make on her own. Completely dismissing her frantic hesitation, King Regulus aggressively grabs her chin in a terrifying display of absolute dominance. Tears instantly well up in Kira's eyes as the horrifying reality of her forced submission violently shatters her spirit. She mournfully recalls how her initial childish admiration for Lord Regulus's striking appearance had blinded her to his cruel nature. Tragically, that innocent infatuation had slowly festered and grown into a deep, genuine love for the cold-hearted monarch. Sitting alone in her dim quarters, Kira lets out a heavy, defeated sigh while reflecting on her doomed romance. Anticipating her family's cowardly response, she quietly mutters that her father should be arriving soon to finalize the grim arrangement. Resigning herself to her tragic reality, she grimly predicts her father will completely accept the king's humiliating concubine proposal without a fight. Desperately trying to rationalize her despair, she attempts to convince herself that becoming a royal concubine wouldn't drastically change her original destiny of marrying into the royal family. The utterly degrading title of concubine echoes painfully through her mind as she stares blankly into the encroaching shadows. Clinging to a pathetic shred of hope, she tragically reasons that simply staying by King Regulus's side might somehow be enough to endure the humiliation. Suddenly, a panicked maid violently bursts through the doors, screaming that something absolutely terrible has happened. The frantic servant hysterically reveals the horrifying news that the newly chosen queen, Lady Yuktya, has collapsed after drinking a deadly poison. Kira freezes in pure, unadulterated horror as the catastrophic implications of the sudden assassination attempt crash over her. Desperate for immediate answers, Kira frantically demands to know if the beloved saint is safe while the royal physician scrambles to save her life. Cutting through the rising chaos, a chillingly familiar voice firmly commands Kira's immediate attention. Turning around in sheer panic, Kira gasps in utter shock as King Regulus abruptly enters the frantic scene. She urgently tries to explain the dire poisoning situation, but the imposing king coldly interrupts to declare he is already fully aware. Glaring at her with absolute malice, Regulus ruthlessly announces he came solely to ensure she wouldn't try to escape his wrath. Completely bewildered by his dark hostility, Kira stammers out a confused plea for him to explain his terrifying accusations. Without warning, heavily armored royal guards suddenly lunge forward and violently seize the terrified noblewoman. Thrashing helplessly against their crushing iron grip, Kira screams in absolute terror as she desperately demands to know what is happening. Brutally ordering her silence, Regulus coldly deduces that Kira is the only person in the entire kingdom who benefits from the saint's sudden collapse. Weeping hysterically, Kira furiously denies the horrific allegations and begs the tyrant king to believe her complete innocence. The soul-crushing reality of her doomed situation fully dawns on her as she weakly whispers in total, paralyzed despair. Completely ignoring her desperate pleas, Regulus tyrannically orders the immediate and unquestioned detainment of all suspicious individuals. The ruthless royal guards violently drag Kira away from her quarters, completely deaf to her agonizing, heartbroken cries. Heavy iron doors slam shut and cold chains rattle ominously as she is forcefully thrown into a desolate, freezing underground cell. Collapsing onto the filthy dungeon floor, the broken noblewoman sobs uncontrollably into the suffocating, absolute darkness. Looking up at the unforgiving stone ceiling, she desperately questions why the divine heavens would curse her with such a wretched, miserable fate. A mysterious and highly amused voice suddenly echoes through the dark cell, perfectly reading her deeply blasphemous thoughts. Demanding to know who is hiding in the pitch-black shadows, Kira is violently startled as the unseen entity mockingly greets the so-called noble villainess. The dark entity playfully announces his immediate presence just as a sinister silhouette begins to materialize before her terrified eyes. A shadowy figure fully emerges into the dim, flickering light, casually introducing himself as a literal creature of hell. Smiling with overwhelming sinister charm, he formally introduces himself as Ruji, the immensely powerful demon of time and shadow. Completely paralyzed by overwhelming fear and absolute disbelief, Kira can barely stammer out a single fractured word of confusion. Clutching her trembling head, she frantically tries to convince herself that the endless agonizing trauma has finally shattered her sanity entirely. Stepping dangerously close to the cowering girl, Ruji firmly and terrifyingly assures her that his demonic existence is absolutely real. Kira lets out a piercing, terrified shriek as the imposing supernatural being forcefully invades her immediate personal space. Smirking with absolute triumphant arrogance, Ruji leans in close to undeniably confirm that he truly exists right before her very eyes. Shocked beyond belief, Kira stares wide-eyed at the sudden appearance of a real and actual demon standing right before her. The demon notes with immense interest that she remains imprisoned despite committing absolutely no crime. He openly confirms his exact knowledge regarding the completely false accusation forcefully brought against her. Fascinated by her unyielding spirit, the towering figure marvels at her uniquely tragic predicament. He reveals his remarkable ability to determine the absolute truth merely by observing the unique color of her soul. The demon surprisingly shatters her dark despair by declaring his genuine belief in her absolute innocence. Stunned by words no one else ever said, Kira listens intently as the demon brings forth a life-altering proposal. She utterly questions the demon's unexpected offer in a state of complete and utter shock. He shatters the heavy silence by offering her an impossible chance to completely redo her ruined life. The demon of time and shadow confirms his ultimate power to violently rewind her very existence. He unapologetically declares his burning and absolute hatred for God. Furious at destiny, the demon schemes to completely overturn the despised divine prophecy destining her to become the king's consort. Kira suspiciously questions if borrowing his demonic power requires the ultimate sacrifice of her very soul. The shadow entity confirms that starting her life over will undoubtedly demand a highly devastating toll. He ominously warns about the impending and absolute loss of a certain inner heart upon accepting the dark pact. He terrifyingly clarifies that she will not become a mindless wreck but will instead completely lose her most precious heart. Dismissing her fear, he laughs off her terrifying guess regarding the loss of her conscience as incredibly boring. The demon vigorously insists that the sacrificed emotion remains entirely unnecessary to successfully grasp true happiness. He darkly relishes her slowly forming agreement with a deep and sinister laugh. Kira boldly accepts the demonic deal to completely rewrite her entirely tragic fate. She vigorously solidifies her unbreakable resolve to finally seize a much happier future. In a sudden flash, the demon passionately catapults Kira straight into her second life with surging temporal power. He loudly decrees a rebellious new motto for her next life while roaring his ultimate defiance against the heavens. He triumphantly proclaims her life entirely hers to decide by forcefully shattering heavy divine chains. Raw mystical energy violently roars through the dark cell to aggressively ignite the incredible temporal transition. Overwhelmed by emotion, Kira passionately thanks him for finally believing in someone exactly like her. Blinding temporal magic violently engulfs the entire prison cell to completely consume the confined space in pure radiant energy. The demon commands Kira to thoroughly enjoy her brand new existence while bidding a dramatic final farewell. Kira successfully restarts her entire life from the very beginning by slipping through vast unseen streams of time. A seemingly peaceful and thoroughly unblemished new world instantly unfolds before her completely reborn eyes. Kira successfully secures a genuinely happy life until a dark and entirely unavoidable truth suddenly surfaces. Refusing false peace, Kira forcibly reclaims her lost heart, which powerfully manifests as a violently burning desire for total revenge. Kira shockingly finds herself returned to the very same cold prison cell after magically warping backward through harsh reality. The completely surprised demon instantly questions if she deeply regrets coming back after everything. Kira fiercely declares her absolute and unchanging resolve to solely pursue her violently burning revenge. Thrilled by her choice, the demon eagerly demands that his fascinating pawn passionately entertain him with a deeply sinister chuckle. Strange and ancient mystical symbols abruptly materialize within the heavy and suffocating darkness of the room. Kira stares in absolute shock at the sudden and intensely glowing magical manifestation. The legendary Book of Prophecy violently manifests directly in front of her to physically shatter the very fabric of reality. Shaken to her absolute core, Kira frantically demands to know what in the entire world is happening right now. Someone frantically cries out to Lord Urkus in a moment of pure panic. The legendary Book of Prophecy suddenly becomes the central focus of a highly supernatural event. A mysterious and entirely unnatural fire violently consumes the sacred artifact. Strange mystical water abruptly manifests to bizarrely interact with the completely unnatural flames. Powerful elemental forces violently clash around the intensely glowing mystical tome. The highly controlled flames miraculously burn only the Book of Prophecy without spreading anywhere else. Lord Urkus intently observes the impossibly contained inferno with absolute and undeniable astonishment. He suddenly gasps in pure shock as the magical flames finally begin to miraculously subside. A brand new prophecy miraculously emerges from the ashes, declaring Kira Six Shandies as the king's official consort. Pure disbelief completely paralyzes the deeply astonished onlookers as the divine truth settles. A panicked subordinate frantically urges Lord Urkus to quickly examine the unbelievable divine message. Words entirely fail the stunned men as the immense weight of the holy revelation crushes their expectations. The high priest abruptly arrives at the royal palace to urgently confront King Regulus. The highly confused king immediately questions the exact reason behind such an incredibly sudden visit. King Regulus reacts with absolute shock upon hearing that the sacred Book of Prophecy completely burned away. The high priest gravely reveals that mysterious new words miraculously formed within the remaining ashes. He sternly warns the stunned monarch that a truly grave and dangerous mistake is currently unfolding. The tense priest pointedly questions if His Majesty recently finalized any major and controversial royal decisions. A heavy and entirely suffocating silence violently fills the massive and opulent throne room. The tense conversation inevitably shifts directly to the deeply concerning subject of Lady Kira. An oppressive wave of pure tension violently forces absolute silence upon the anxious royal court. The deeply concerned priest frantically demands to know if something terrible recently happened to Lady Kira. An authoritative voice sharply commands the hesitant informant to immediately continue speaking the ugly truth. The shocking truth violently emerges that the king cruelly demoted Kira to a mere concubine while elevating Yuktya to queen. It is gravely revealed that Yuktya collapsed from sudden poisoning and Kira was wrongfully imprisoned as the prime suspect. The highly skeptical priest aggressively questions what actual concrete evidence exists to justify such a terrifyingly severe accusation. A desperate accuser ridiculously claims Kira is obviously the culprit solely due to her blazing jealousy over the new queen. The completely astonished priest harshly condemns the royal court for violently accusing her of a major crime based purely on subjective feelings. He furiously demands them to stop acting so recklessly and immediately order the total release of the wrongfully imprisoned woman. The bold priest aggressively warns King Regulus of being historically cursed as a completely mad and selfish king. The furiously cornered king viciously grits his teeth in pure and deeply seething rage. King Regulus violently roars that his absolute royal decision stands and Kira will absolutely never be released. The frustrated priest bitterly admits his religious authority completely fails to forcibly release a royal prisoner. He suddenly pivots his tactical approach with a highly defiant and cunning glare. He powerfully asserts his absolute religious right to directly speak with the prisoner without any royal interference whatsoever. The deeply frustrated king furiously relents to the visit but stubbornly refuses to release Kira from her cold cell. The highly determined priest coldly accepts this minor victory as entirely sufficient for his immediate divine plans. A sympathetic guide leads the way while deeply lamenting the sheer cruelty of imprisoning her based on mere suspicion. The shocked visitor vigorously notes that such incredibly harsh treatment is entirely unacceptable for a noble lady regardless of her supposed guilt. He gravely anticipates finding Lady Kira completely consumed by absolute and utter despair in the terribly dark dungeon. Urkus pauses outside the dark cell, completely caught off guard by the unexpected sound of beautiful singing. He peers through the heavy iron bars to witness a truly unbelievable sight within the gloomy dungeon. Kira abruptly stops her melody, turning her head as she notices a sudden presence nearby. The astonished high priest calls out her name, deeply bewildered by her surprisingly serene demeanor. Kira smiles warmly, expressing genuine delight at receiving an unexpected guest in such a grim place. She lightly remarks on the sheer rarity of visitors while respectfully acknowledging High Priest Urkus. Urkus greets her formally, internally marveling at how she maintains perfect sanity under such harsh conditions. He solemnly steps forward to confront the imprisoned noblewoman about the heavy accusations shadowing her. He directly addresses the dark rumors, stating he heard she allegedly poisoned Lady Yuktya. Kira fiercely declares her absolute innocence, firmly stating she possesses zero motive to harm the saint. Urkus sharply counters that losing the highly coveted position of queen to Yuktya serves as a powerful motive. Instead of reacting with defensive rage, Kira surprisingly lets out a soft, mocking chuckle. She dismisses the absurd idea of jealousy, openly scoffing at the assumption that she desperately wanted the crown. The highly confused priest hesitates, questioning if her supposed royal ambitions were entirely false. She confidently clarifies that becoming the ruling queen was absolutely never a path she genuinely desired. Kira explains that the king mutually understood her true feelings, leading to their irreversible broken engagement. She coldly reveals that assigning her the lesser title of concubine merely served to placate furious government ministers. Kira confidently challenges the high priest to fully grasp the heavy political reality of her complex situation. She logically concludes her powerful argument by firmly reiterating her complete lack of motive to resent the new queen. Kira loudly and unapologetically declares her total absence of romantic love for King Regulus. Urkus acknowledges her strong words but severely reminds her that a lack of love does not legally prove innocence. She sharply notes the royal court's refusal to listen, requesting Urkus to officially convey her statement. Urkus solemnly agrees to deliver her message before she abruptly adds one more crucial point. She cunningly shifts the narrative, highlighting that her absolute innocence undoubtedly proves someone else is the true culprit. Kira fiercely warns that the divine gods absolutely reject a corrupt royal court failing to pursue proper investigations. Urkus realizes his own massive blind spot, heavily admitting he completely overlooked the broader mystery. She passionately implores the powerful temple to utilize its divine authority to launch a full and unbiased investigation. The high priest firmly agrees to her intense request with a serious and unwavering expression. Kira gracefully bows her head, boldly stating her high expectations for the servant of the gods. Urkus formally promises to aggressively petition for her immediate release from the dark dungeon. The observing demon sinisterly chuckles from the shadows, highly praising Kira for skillfully manipulating the powerful priest. He delightfully anticipates the rapidly shifting narrative as thrilling new variables enter their complex game. The demonic entity wonders with immense dark curiosity exactly how this thoroughly disrupted timeline will ultimately unfold. The dark corridors of the royal prisons silently witness the terrifying gears of a brand new destiny beginning to turn. Heavily armored guards march purposefully through the oppressive stone hallways to officially execute the new royal orders. Kira cheerfully anticipates her upgraded accommodations after successfully securing a transfer to the lavish nobles' prison. A stunned onlooker utterly fails to reconcile her current bubbly demeanor with her previously established dark reputation. Kira violently rejects the ignorant assumption that her drastic personality shift makes her a completely different person. She boldly and joyfully declares that this fiercely independent woman is the absolute true version of Kira Six Shandies. With burning resolve and a bright smile, Kira confidently marches forward to completely dominate her second life. The towering demon highly praises Kira's calculated manipulation of the priest as a promising start to her dark journey. A heavy visual silence settles as shifting shadows heavily trace her quiet transition deeper into the fortified royal prison complex. Solid iron bars firmly secure the surprisingly spacious and swept perimeter of her newly designated noble confinement cell. Exhausted by the overwhelming temporal shift, Kira completely surrenders to peaceful slumber on a genuine mattress for the first time. She awakens deeply refreshed and analytically observes that her current noble accommodations vastly exceed the rotting dungeon she previously occupied. A brief doubt washes over her as she questions whether this comfortable transfer would have inevitably happened without her struggling for a second chance. The demonic entity abruptly manifests to warn her that the highly perceptive high priest definitively realized an unknown force defied the divine gods. He quickly shatters her rising panic by clarifying that the priest completely misidentified the true source of this massive temporal disruption. The demon sinisterly explains that Urkus foolishly blames the king's arrogant mistakes rather than suspecting Kira of establishing a forbidden pact. Shock violently courses through Kira as she rapidly pieces together the terrifying implications of the high priest's intense supernatural investigation. The shadow entity gravely cautions her to remain absolutely vigilant because his raw demonic presence was the priest's original investigative target. Staring intensely into the dark void, Kira heavily processes this dangerous new variable while the demon awaits her next tactical command. He sharply questions her immediate strategic plans now that she actively walks a treacherous and bloody path paved with burning revenge. A deeply calculating silence heavily settles over Kira as she mentally reviews her severely limited options within the fortified prison. She utterly confuses the expectant demon by bluntly declaring her absolute intention to do absolutely nothing at this exact moment. Kira pragmatically explains her calculated decision to lie low because her current imprisoned status prevents any direct offensive maneuvers. Frustrated by her absolute physical limitations, Kira aggressively demands that the blunt demon forcefully lend her his dark mystical power. The dark entity pauses in genuine surprise at her fiercely unapologetic and incredibly demanding audacity in the face of demonic authority. An amused smirk violently twists the demon's shadowy features as he dangerously offers to formally grant her access to forbidden magic. Kira's heart violently pounds with pure exhilaration at the prospect of wielding a mystical power that completely eclipses the high priest. Ignoring her starry-eyed awe, the demon casually frames his reality-bending intervention as killing time while Kira violently obsesses over magic. Excitement entirely consumes her rational mind as she wildly visualizes her grand transformation into an unstoppable and immensely powerful magical force. She intensely hallucinates a glorious future where she violently obliterates her royal enemies with brilliantly devastating displays of raw mystical energy. Her wild power fantasy rapidly spirals into an utterly euphoric vision of absolute and uncontested magical dominance over the terrified royal court. The demon sharply shatters her delusional grandiosity with a condescending glare that swiftly brings her crashing back to harsh reality. He ruthlessly crushes her dreams by bluntly clarifying that she will absolutely never possess the capacity to cast all-powerful magic. A dark tension violently floods the cell as he gravely warns her that utilizing demonic sorcery always demands an inescapable price. He ominously details the grim supernatural mechanics, explicitly stating that casting this spell will permanently strip away something vital. Kira swallows her rising fear and bitterly acknowledges that suffering a heavy toll is entirely expected when bargaining with a demon. He brutally enforces the ultimate restriction by declaring she can only ignite this immensely costly magic exactly one more time. Confused by the vague parameters, Kira desperately questions the specific nature of this magic, prompting the demon to arrogantly tell her to figure it out. He cryptically explains that the core defining words completely embodying her current soul will uniquely forge a highly specialized spell belonging exclusively to her. Kira furiously searches her deeply scarred psyche to identify the singular defining concept that perfectly encapsulates her existence. She terrifyingly deduces that her personalized spell will undoubtedly manifest as a dark and highly destructive revenge magic fueled by her trauma. The demon issues a dark challenge, coldly asking if the terrifying prospect of wielding such violent vengeance makes her want to stop. Kira fiercely crushes her hesitation and aggressively demands the magic, boldly recognizing the absolute necessity of possessing a hidden trump card. A deeply satisfied and incredibly menacing chuckle darkly rumbles from the shadowy depths of the imposing demonic entity. He highly praises her unbreakable and thoroughly ruthless spirit as the exact dark momentum required to fuel their unholy transaction. Commanding her to hold absolutely still, the demon violently initiates the forbidden supernatural ritual to forcefully brand her soul with magic. Blinding mystical energy violently erupts within the enclosed cell as ancient demonic forces aggressively bind immense unholy power directly into Kira's flesh. Kira stammers in sudden confusion as a completely unexpected situation abruptly unfolds right before her stunned eyes. A soft thud violently shatters the tense silence as Ruji suddenly leans incredibly close to the highly startled noblewoman. Kira nervously points out that the towering demon named Ruji is standing far too close for her current comfort. Ruji boldly dismisses her frantic worries with a highly confident and fiercely arrogant demonic smirk. Her heart violently pounds in her chest as she desperately reminds the imposing demon that she remains an innocent maiden. The incredibly tense atmosphere violently thickens as raw magical energy slowly begins swirling around their closely entangled bodies. Ancient, unholy runes brilliantly flash across the dimly lit cell as the forbidden demonic ritual quickly approaches its ultimate peak. Kira suddenly realizes that the overwhelmingly powerful magical sensation coursing directly through her veins feels bizarrely unexpected. A surprisingly soothing wave of pure mystical tranquility completely washes away her surging panic and intense anxiety. The intense magical aura finally dissipates to leave Kira permanently branded with a brand new and deeply mysterious power. King Regulus gently checks on the fragile saint as she successfully recovers within her lavish and heavily guarded royal chambers. Yuktya offers a bright and cheerful smile while firmly declaring her complete and utter physical recovery to the anxious king. The highly relieved monarch softly notes that the urgent medical treatment successfully purged the dangerous poison from her delicate system. Regulus furiously glares at High Priest Urkus for rudely interrupting the highly anticipated and joyous recovery celebration. Urkus aggressively snaps back at the hostile monarch by boldly blaming the king's own monumental foolishness for the bitter tension. The enraged king furiously condemns the powerful priest for selfishly transferring the imprisoned Kira to the highly luxurious noble prison. Urkus coldly reminds the seething ruler that the powerful government ministers absolutely refuse to tolerate his reckless royal tyranny. King Regulus violently grits his teeth in pure impotent rage against the unyielding and overwhelmingly dominant religious authority. The bold priest aggressively shatters the king's false narrative by loudly questioning Kira's allegedly obvious criminal motive. Urkus shockingly reveals that Kira explicitly confessed to possessing absolutely no romantic love for the deeply arrogant king. Regulus furiously screams that her shocking confession is an absolute lie meticulously designed to hide her vicious and violent jealousy. The cunning priest viciously mocks the aggressively stuttering king by heavily implying he desperately craves Kira's definitively rejected affection. Yuktya stares in pure unadulterated shock as the king's highly desperate obsession with Kira's true feelings violently surfaces. The panicked saint frantically begs High Priest Urkus to immediately cease his brutal and heavily calculated psychological attack. Yuktya tearfully points out the undeniable romantic tension while desperately clinging to the king's shattered prior vows of eternal love. The ruthless priest darkly calculates his next highly devastating verbal strike while clinically analyzing the rapidly crumbling royal relationship. Urkus harshly accuses Yuktya of hypocritically deepening her royal romance despite fully knowing the intense suffering it inflicted on Kira. The absolutely furious king violently erupts to aggressively defend the deeply insulted saint from the priest's incredibly venomous accusations. Urkus abruptly shifts the incredibly tense conversation by coldly announcing that the sacred divine prophecy has been completely denied. The authoritative priest officially declares that Yuktya will rule as the sole queen, which completely eliminates Kira's broken royal engagement. Urkus loudly proclaims that the immensely powerful temple will officially bestow its holy blessing upon the highly controversial royal union. Yuktya gasps in absolute delight as the highly coveted religious endorsement finally secures her deeply ambitious royal future. The completely ecstatic saint excitedly confirms the glorious news while blissfully ignoring the underlying and highly toxic political manipulation. Yuktya joyfully celebrates the absolute removal of all political obstacles violently standing between their supposedly pure and fated love. King Regulus stammers a remarkably weak agreement while a dark and heavy cloud of unspoken regret deeply shadows his trembling eyes. The deeply conflicted monarch stares completely blankly ahead as the sheer crushing weight of his irreversible decisions completely shatters his spirit. Yuktya subtly smiles with immense dark satisfaction as her ultimate and highly calculated royal ambition miraculously falls perfectly into place. The triumphant saint sadistically wonders exactly what kind of pathetic and utterly broken expression currently stains Kira's ruined face. Back in the fortified prison cell, Ruji strictly commands Kira to closely monitor the immense demonic magic violently surging inside her. The towering demon urgently warns her that aggressively forcing too much raw power actively threatens to violently overload her newly forged spell. Exhausting her remaining stamina, the protagonist collapses with a heavy sigh over the grueling magical ordeal. Realizing the immense difficulty of channeling miraculous power without rigorous training, they acknowledge that using such potent magic is an incredibly arduous hassle. Suddenly, the rhythmic sound of approaching footsteps shatters the tense silence of the corridor as someone rapidly draws near. Anticipating her usual routine, she casually wonders if the unexpected arrival signals that it is finally time for dinner. Caught completely off guard, she lets out a breathless gasp as an entirely unexpected sight greets her eyes. Shattering the quiet atmosphere of the dungeon, Lady Yuktya suddenly appears alongside her escort to politely greet Lady Kira. Shocked by this bizarre visitation, Kira immediately questions why anyone of high status would willingly descend into such a desolate place. Hesitating for a brief tense moment, the nervous visitor struggles visibly to find the right words to explain her sudden intrusion. Breaking the heavy tension, Yuktya awkwardly expresses her conflicted happiness over the official news that Kira's engagement to Lord Urkus has been firmly decided. Fretful and visibly anxious, Yuktya openly admits that she is deeply worried about how Kira truly feels regarding this monumental shift in her life. Spurred by a frantic realization of their circumstances, it is sharply suggested that they should confront Lady Kira directly to settle the matter. Seeking immediate reassurance, they desperately hope that hearing directly from Kira will finally confirm she holds no lingering love for the king. Chaos suddenly erupts in the damp cell as an eager demand to meet her is violently met with a furious shout of absolute outrage. Driven by an insatiable curiosity, Yuktya boldly declares her intense desire to see exactly what kind of person the fallen Kira has truly become. A tense, suffocating silence settles over the cold stone room as the crushing weight of the sudden confrontation hangs heavily in the stagnant air. Turning sharply on her heel, Yuktya fiercely demands validation from Lord Regulus to challenge his thoughts on her audacious presence. Standing her ground with unyielding resolve, Yuktya firmly asserts that her unprecedented arrival was born purely out of deep, genuine concern for Lady Kira. Unfazed and radiating an aura of stoic calm, Kira coldly brushes off the dramatic concern by stating there is absolutely no particular problem with her situation. Refusing to drop the pressing issue, Yuktya pushes forward aggressively by insisting that suffering in such a grim place must be incredibly difficult to endure. Stumbling over her own forced laughter, Yuktya hastily corrects her words while nervously gesturing to the dreary, oppressive reality of the prison. Maintaining her absolute composure, Kira boldly declares that since she is entirely innocent of any crime, this temporary imprisonment is merely a unique life experience before her inevitable glorious release. Unspoken electrifying tension thickens the heavy prison air as the two fierce rivals lock eyes in a silent, unwavering standoff. Brimming with defiant, untouchable confidence, Kira cheerfully announces her excitement to eagerly regale her father and the loyal maids with thrilling tales of her dungeon ordeal. Boiling over with rapidly suppressing frustration, Yuktya brutally grinds her teeth in an agitated, totally speechless fury. Scoffing dismissively with a smirk, Kira ruthlessly reminds her trembling rival that she has always possessed this indomitable, fiercely unapologetic personality. Outraged by the sheer unbridled audacity on display, Regulus furiously scolds Lady Kira for projecting such a wildly unseemly and arrogant attitude. Rejecting the harsh reprimand instantly, a fierce protective shout cuts through the dungeon gloom to vehemently deny the baseless accusation. Passionately defending her pristine honor, a bold voice loudly proclaims that Lady Kira unequivocally remains the absolute finest flower of the entire royal palace. Caught completely off guard by the lavish praise, Yuktya fiercely denies it while arguing desperately over who was truly deemed most suitable to become the king's rightful queen. Redirecting the crushing burden of royal expectations, Kira firmly insists that Yuktya is the only woman genuinely worthy to stand beside the king. Desperately seeking the hidden truth, Yuktya aggressively accuses Kira of having secretly loved the king all along despite her carefully crafted cold public persona. Shattering all lingering doubts with piercing clarity, Kira bluntly reassures her stunned rival that she holds absolutely no romantic love for the king whatsoever. Expressing a profound sense of unexpected gratitude, Kira shockingly reveals that Yuktya's actions have finally liberated her from the suffocating divine chains of God's ancient prophecy. Flashing a disarmingly bright radiant smile, Kira offers a genuine heartfelt declaration of thanks to a completely paralyzed and utterly stunned Lady Yuktya. A heavy, deeply bewildered silence crashes over the royal visitors as Kira's shocking, unprecedented gratitude echoes endlessly through the cold stone cell. Delivering the final emotionally crushing blow of pure kindness, Kira bows her head slightly to sincerely and fervently pray for Yuktya's ultimate happiness with the king. Trembling uncontrollably with a volatile mix of seething anger and absolute disbelief, Yuktya coldly mutters that Kira absolutely should do exactly that. Simmering with an unresolved dark rage, Yuktya glares fiercely and intensely at the remarkably unfazed peaceful prisoner sitting before her. Snapping completely under the psychological pressure, Yuktya furiously demands that Kira show genuine remorse by viciously screaming that she is currently rotting away as a convicted criminal. Left entirely speechless by the sheer unhinged absurdity of the violent outburst, Kira simply blinks in pure, unadulterated and almost comical confusion. An expectant silence fills the cold dungeon as the dramatic confrontation pauses for a fleeting moment. Demanding genuine repentance, Yuktya commands her rival to work earnestly towards securing a quiet release from the grim prison. Offering a humiliating compromise, Yuktya declares that Kira may serve as a silent consort while living entirely in her dominant shadow. Pushing her authority further, Yuktya insists that Kira must issue a sincere public apology to the royal palace upon her eventual release. Infuriated by an unexpected reaction, Yuktya furiously demands to know what Kira finds so incredibly amusing as dark laughter echoes. Dismissing the arrogant proposal completely, Kira brutally mocks the ridiculous assumption that she harbors any actual love for the king. Struggling to comprehend the sheer defiance, Yuktya stammers helplessly before aggressively trying to change the uncomfortable subject. Pivoting the intense conversation, Yuktya maliciously reminds Kira of the lingering suspicion regarding the true culprit who poisoned the king. A heavy, suffocating silence descends upon the cold stone cell as the poisonous accusations hang fiercely in the stagnant air. Snapping her attention away from her captive, Yuktya sharply calls out to a nearby dungeon guard to issue a brutal new command. Exerting her cruel authority, Yuktya viciously orders the guards to starve Kira by withholding all food and severely limiting her water. The ruthless starvation order echoes chillingly through the dark corridors, sealing a grim new reality for the isolated prisoner. Shocked by the sheer brutality of the sudden decree, a desperate voice cries out Lady Yuktya's name in pure disbelief. Observing the harsh punishment with dark amusement, the demon Ruji softly notes the absolute cruelty of denying her meals. Calculating the grim survival odds, Ruji coldly estimates that subsisting on mere water will only keep her alive for 2 or 3 agonizing weeks. Sensing a potential shift in her unwavering demeanor, Ruji mockingly asks Kira if the terrifying reality of starvation is finally breaking her spirit. Brushing off the looming threat entirely, Kira calmly questions how long the demon plans to loiter uselessly around her miserable cell. Staring into the shadows with unfazed resolve, Kira boldly challenges him by asking if he intends to stay by her side until her very last breath. Embracing the dark irony, Kira wonders aloud if dying in the arms of a demon would serve as a beautifully defiant rebellion against God. Intrigued by her beautifully twisted logic, the demon smoothly agrees that such a tragic end might indeed be remarkably fitting. A strange dark comfort settles between the condemned royal and the lingering demon as they silently contemplate her impending doom. Shifting his sharp focus, Ruji astutely points out that Lady Yuktya appears far more dangerously obsessed with Kira than with actually loving the king. Analyzing the toxic rivalry, Ruji declares that Yuktya desperately needs to see Kira broken and crying in misery to feel any true sense of victory. Highlighting the core flaw in Yuktya's desperate plan, Ruji explains that Kira's absolute lack of romantic feelings completely ruins the intended suffering. Smirking at the pathetic nature of mortal jealousy, the demon chuckles darkly at how predictably human the whole miserable situation truly is. Laughing brightly at the sheer absurdity, Kira cheerfully admits she finds such petty emotional obsession completely annoying and utterly incomprehensible. Pausing her joyful laughter, Kira thoughtfully confesses that there is actually someone else whose intense feelings confuse her far more. Piercing right to the heart of the royal mystery, Ruji bluntly asks why the king harbors such a deep and unyielding hatred for her. The heavy question hangs palpably in the dark air as Kira prepares to unveil the grim truth behind her ruined royal reputation. Unfazed by the painful topic, Kira smoothly reveals that there is indeed a very specific and calculated reason behind the king's absolute disdain. Revealing the incredible advantage of her reincarnation, Kira explains that during her second life she actively investigated the root cause of his hatred. Recounting her past covert operations, she explains how she enlisted her loyal father and a trusted maid to successfully uncover the hidden truth. Dropping a massive narrative bombshell, Kira reveals her investigation proved that a shadowy figure had been deliberately framing her all along. Shattering the final mystery, Kira bluntly identifies Lady Yuktya's own father as the sinister mastermind behind her agonizing public downfall. With fierce conviction, the true architect of her misery is finally named as the treacherous Count Mazer La Mink. Connecting all the dark political dots, Kira confirms that the Count was the sole force intentionally manipulating King Regulus into despising her. Reinforcing the cruel betrayal, Kira reiterates that Yuktya's powerful Marquis father single-handedly orchestrated the entire vicious smear campaign. Exposing the toxic political strategy, she describes how he weaponized his loyal attendants to continuously feed the king nasty fabricated rumors. Unveiling the ultimate greedy endgame, Kira explains that every lie was meticulously designed to secure the throne for his daughter Yuktya. The sheer magnitude of the political conspiracy settles heavily in the dungeon as the undeniable truth of Kira's tragic framing is finally fully exposed. Reflecting on her second life, Kira reveals she successfully avoided disaster by reporting the hidden truth to the palace. Processing the complex revelation, her companion hesitantly admits to understanding the bizarre political situation. A thoughtful silence hangs heavily as the weight of her past actions settles into the dark dungeon. Stunned by the sheer madness of the royal family, he questions what kind of twisted upbringing creates such an insane king. Shadows deepen in the cold cell as Kira prepares to unveil the tragic secrets of the king's haunted past. Drawing from her unique memories, Kira confirms that the king openly confessed his deep traumas during her second life. Unveiling his grim childhood, she explains how he lost his mother early and suffered under a brutally harsh father. A tragic flashback reveals the tormented young Regulus tearfully screaming that he never once experienced genuine parental love. Contrasting their entirely different childhoods, Kira recalls being deeply doted upon by the former king while her companion pities the pathetic monarch. Acknowledging her own family tragedy, Kira quietly mentions that her beloved mother tragically perished in a devastating epidemic. Revealing a surprising maternal bond, she explains that her gentle mother had actively helped the lonely prince back then. Seeking desperate solace, the suffering young Regulus frequently visited her mother for comfort and treated her like his own. A soft, nostalgic expression crosses Kira's face as she remembers her late mother as a remarkably gentle and deeply caring person. Bursting into sudden loud laughter, Ruji loudly declares that he finally understands the twisted royal psychology completely. Analyzing the bitter resentment, Ruji points out that Kira was freely given the love of both his father and his surrogate mother. Shocked by the sudden brutal clarity, Kira gasps in sheer disbelief at the devastating psychological analysis. Driving the harsh point home, Ruji explains that her innocent pursuit of Regulus's love made her appear unforgivably arrogant in his envious eyes. Highlighting the toxic dynamic, he bluntly states that possessing everything the king desired made her unbearably envy-inducing. Connecting the final tragic dots, Ruji concludes that the Mink Marquis's vicious rumors ignited an entirely justified and explosive royal rage. Reeling from the sudden realization, Kira questions how Regulus could have possibly fallen in love with her during her second life. Explaining the emotional shift, Ruji notes that by completely ignoring the king, she ceased being the arrogant woman aiming for his precious crown. Recalling her alternate timeline choices, she remembers actively avoiding him entirely to fiercely pursue her dream of becoming a noble knight. Smirking at the ironic twist, Ruji deduces that her wildly eccentric behavior simply caught his unexpected interest and sparked genuine royal affection. A heavy, stunned silence envelopes Kira as the absolute absurdity of her intertwined romantic fates finally crashes over her. Questioning her own startling lack of awareness, Kira groans in pure frustration while wondering if she is hopelessly and unbelievably dense. Rejecting the sudden, overwhelming self-doubt, Kira furiously dismisses the ridiculous thought with a loud and dramatic shout. Chuckling at her sudden explosive outburst, Ruji mockingly asks if she actually plans to lose sleep over such trivial emotional nonsense. Brushing off the toxic royal drama completely, Kira proudly declares she refuses to waste time worrying about people who unjustly blamed her. Pleased by her unyielding, fierce spirit, Ruji smirks and warmly notes that such bold defiance perfectly suits her character. Exhaling a long, steadying breath, Kira regains her unshakable composure in the damp and oppressive dungeon gloom. Breaking the peaceful silence, Ruji casually asks how she is handling the brutal reality of surviving on absolutely nothing but water. The sharp, rhythmic clatter of approaching footsteps suddenly interrupts the quiet conversation as an unexpected visitor draws near. Standing coldly outside the iron bars, a stone-faced guard flatly announces that it is finally time for her water ration. Maintaining her graceful, noble composure, Kira politely thanks the emotionless servant for delivering her very first serving of the day. The servant slowly extends a simple wooden cup filled with precious life-saving water through the heavy iron bars. Reaching out with a steady, eager hand, Kira moves to carefully accept the desperately needed cup of fresh water. In a sudden, cruel twist, the servant maliciously jerks their hand away before Kira can successfully grasp the wooden cup. The heavy cup plunges forcefully toward the cold stone floor as the precious water splashes wildly into the stagnant dungeon air. Her vital daily ration tragically violently shatters against the ground and pools uselessly across the dirty stone tiles. Feigning completely fake panic, the cruel servant issues a deeply insincere apology while maliciously claiming their hand simply slipped. Staring coldly at the spilled water, the cruel servant bluntly declares that cleaning up the mess is entirely Lady Kira's responsibility. Refusing to offer any real assistance, the guard smirks and states she was merely ordered to carry the water to the cell. Maintaining her composure, Kira politely asks the smirking servant if she will at least fetch a fresh cup. Rejecting the request instantly, the guard firmly states that the daily allotment has already been fully delivered. Shifting her arrogant posture, the servant prepares to deliver an even more degrading insult to the captive noble. Pointing mockingly at the wet stone floor, she cruelly notes that there is still plenty of water right there. Outraged by the sheer audacity, Kira angrily demands to know if the wretched servant is actively trying to provoke a physical beating. Unfazed by the threat, the servant viciously commands the disgraced noble to drop to the floor and crawl for her drink. Reeling from the sudden blatant disrespect, Kira gasps in pure shock at the incredibly awful and degrading suggestion. Trembling with an intense, overwhelming emotion, Kira initially appears completely crushed by this unprecedented level of humiliation. A tense, expectant silence fills the dungeon as the cruel servant waits for the proud noble to finally break down and weep. Shattering the grim atmosphere completely, Kira throws her head back and erupts into a booming fit of wildly unexpected laughter. Dropping all pretenses, Kira fiercely commands the trembling guard to stop hiding behind the cowardly facade of an anonymous nobody. Striking with surgical precision, Kira loudly exposes the cruel servant's true identity as Lady Kate Magdalene, the Baron's daughter. Panic flashes across Kate's face as she desperately demands to know how the prisoner recognized her hidden noble status. Leaning closer to the iron bars, Kira sharply questions if this petty bullying stems from a pathetic underlying sense of pure envy. Dismissing the pathetic motives entirely, Kira fiercely declares that the exact reason behind the cruel bullying simply does not matter. Radiating absolute authority, Kira coldly informs the trembling Baron's daughter that she completely misunderstands the entire royal situation. Unveiling the deep political complexity, she explains that her current imprisonment involves a massive web of incredibly tangled emotions. Elevating the stakes dramatically, Kira firmly states that King Regulus's own divine will is deeply woven into her current confinement. Instilling pure dread, Kira asks if Kate truly believes the king will tolerate a lowly outsider violently interfering with his personal affairs. Building upon the terrifying warning, Kira glares fiercely to deliver her most absolute and devastating threat yet. With eyes burning with unyielding fury, Kira vehemently declares that the foolish girl has officially made a deadly enemy of House Shandy's. Painting a grim picture of retribution, Kira promises a terrifying future where Kate herself will be brutally denied basic food and water. Chuckling darkly at the horrific imagery, Kira maliciously adds that Kate should feel intensely grateful if starvation is her only punishment. Crushing the girl's remaining spirit, Kira mockingly questions if the terrified noble truly believes she still has a bright future ahead. Seizing total psychological control, Kira sharply snaps the girl's name to command absolute immediate obedience. Projecting the unwavering dominance of a true ruler, Kira orders Kate to immediately clean the mess and fetch fresh water. Completely broken by the overwhelming intimidation, Kate stammers out a panicked agreement to retrieve cleaning tools and fresh water. Fleeing in absolute terror, the defeated Baron's daughter scurries away to desperately fulfill the powerful prisoner's demands. Emerging from the dungeon shadows, Ruji smirks widely while genuinely complimenting Kira on her remarkably ruthless and effective handling of the situation. Annoyed by his relaxed spectator attitude, Kira sharply criticizes the demon for lazily acting like the entire conflict had absolutely nothing to do with him. Brushing off her irritation, Ruji casually admits that the sudden messy confrontation was incredibly unexpected and utterly hilarious to witness. Showering her with dark praise, the demon declares her flawless verbal shutdown perfectly matches the wicked woman he always knew she was. A brief moment of victorious silence settles over the cell as Kira successfully reclaims her absolute dominance over the grim situation. Beaming with fierce, untouchable pride, Kira loudly boasts that nobody should ever dare to underestimate the mighty villainous Lady Kira. A dramatic and sudden shift in time plunges the narrative forward as 5 agonizing days rapidly pass in the dark, isolated cell. Piercing the deathly quiet of the dungeon, Ruji's concerned voice gently calls out to the motionless prisoner lying on the cold floor. Gasping for a ragged breath, Kira weakly mutters that she is somehow still clinging to her fading life. Enduring the brutal ravages of extreme starvation, the resilient noble refuses to surrender as she stubbornly survives the devastating 5-day ordeal. Refusing to surrender to her grim circumstances, Kira fiercely rejects such a miserable fate. Fueled by a blazing thirst for revenge, she fiercely vows that she will never allow herself to die here. Clinging to her fading consciousness, the imprisoned noble struggles desperately against the overwhelming physical exhaustion. Watching her physical deterioration, Ruji bluntly warns her that she is rapidly approaching her absolute limit despite her tough facade. The dark demon softly calls out her name as he watches her struggle in the oppressive dungeon gloom. Inspiring her to maintain her fierce pride, Ruji commands her to hold her head high no matter how this ordeal ends. He sharply reminds her that failing to remain unbroken would render her entire reincarnation completely pointless. Taking his powerful words to heart, Kira steels her unwavering resolve in the suffocating darkness. Looking up with renewed determination, she softly breathes the demon's name in a moment of quiet gratitude. Offering a rare and genuine expression of thanks, she promises to uphold her unyielding royal pride. The sudden rhythmic sound of heavy footsteps alerts them to an unexpected arrival far outside the normal water schedule. Tense anticipation builds as the heavy footfalls echo ominously through the cold stone corridor. The heavy iron door creaks open to reveal a highly imposing and terrifying figure standing in the shadows. Shock ripples through the damp cell as King Regulus himself unexpectedly steps into the bleak dungeon. A royal guard fiercely snaps at the captive noble for failing to immediately show proper respect. Demanding absolute submission, the guard forcefully orders Kira to kneel before the absolute authority of King Regulus. Refusing to bow to the tyrannical monarch, Kira maintains her defiant posture despite her severely weakened state. Furious at her blatant disrespect, the guard aggressively repeats his harsh command for her to drop to her knees. A weak but distinctly mocking smirk crosses Kira's lips as she fiercely challenges the royal authority. Enraged by her arrogance, the guard viciously brands her a treacherous criminal guilty of plotting a royal poisoning. Staring directly into the king's eyes, Kira boldly declares she has no reason to kneel because she is completely innocent of the crime. Delivering a crushing emotional blow, Kira bluntly states that she holds absolutely no love for the king. Shattering his stoic facade, King Regulus furiously screams at her to shut her mouth. Panting heavily from his explosive outburst, the enraged monarch struggles to control his wildly volatile emotions. Confused by his sudden intense reaction, Kira stares blankly at the heavily breathing ruler. Dismissing him entirely, Kira coldly informs the king that she has absolutely no intention of entertaining him since she will be dead soon anyway. Exposing the brutal truth, she reveals that Lady Yuktya explicitly ordered her to be aggressively starved for days. A sudden jolt of sheer terror strikes the king as the horrifying reality of her starvation fully registers. Reeling from the devastating revelation, Regulus visibly staggers under the heavy weight of the cruel truth. Watching the dramatic royal breakdown, Ruji dryly notes that Kira's brutal honesty was incredibly effective. Desperate shouts echo through the corridor as an emergency medical team rushes frantically toward the cell. Completely bewildered by the sudden frantic rescue attempt, Kira watches the chaotic scene unfold in stunned silence. Panicked palace physicians desperately explain that they were urgently summoned upon learning of her severe starvation. Frantically preparing their medical supplies, the doctors insist they must treat her critical condition immediately. Chaos erupts in the cell as the desperate royal healers swarm the weakened prisoner to save her fading life. Overwhelmed by the sudden influx of chaotic medical attention, Kira groggily questions the massive commotion. A frantic attendant reveals that the king never actually intended for her to be subjected to such lethal cruelty. Validating her unexpected royal protection, it is urgently explained that the king is absolutely furious over her brutal mistreatment. Processing the bizarre twist of fate, Kira quietly acknowledges the chaotic medical intervention. Drifting out of consciousness amidst the desperate shouts, Kira realizes that in this twisted timeline the king actually harbors a deeply warped love for her. An authoritative voice fiercely demands to know the meaning of Yuktya's treacherous actions. The accuser directly confronts Yuktya about her cruel order to intentionally withhold food from Kira. Defending her malice, Yuktya furiously claims she simply wanted the arrogant criminal to reflect on her terrible misdeeds. The interrogator coldly dismisses her excuse by stating there is absolutely no need for Kira to reflect on anything. Yuktya glares in fierce frustration as she realizes the meddling high priest has interfered once again. Stepping forward with unyielding authority, the high priest announces he has come today to deliver a crucial document. He presents a formal report conclusively proving that Lady Kira is absolutely innocent of the poisoning incident. Yuktya gasps in sheer terror as he loudly reveals they possess solid evidence and undeniable testimony. The high priest angrily condemns Kira's unjust imprisonment as a foolish act based on mere suspicion and false impressions. A heavy, suffocating silence fills the massive room as the undeniable truth effectively crushes the fragile lies. Shifting the dangerous momentum, he smoothly suggests a brand new suspect has risen to the surface. Yuktya violently recoils in shock as she realizes the devastating murder accusation is aimed squarely at her. He aggressively exposes her sinister plot to frame Lady Kira by staging a fake poisoning and starving her in a cold cell. Absolute panic sets in as Yuktya frantically screams her absolute denial of the damning allegations. Desperate to escape blame, she scrambles to justify her wicked actions by hiding behind the king's ruthless imprisonment policies. Her flimsy excuses completely crumble into nothingness as absolute dread washes over her trembling form. Shattered by the terrifying turn of events, she pathetically begs Lord Regulus to provide her with salvation. Completely ignoring her pleas, the high priest firmly demands the immediate release of the proven innocent Lady Kira. He bows before his majesty and strongly urges the king to finally make the righteous decision. Yuktya cries out one last desperate agonizing plea to Lord Regulus as her dark fate is officially sealed. The immense pressure of the tense throne room hangs heavily as the crushing final verdict is silently decided. The oppressive atmosphere completely shatters in an instant as the narrative violently shifts to a quiet, peaceful sanctuary. Lady Kira groggily awakens in a safe, warm bed entirely far removed from the horrors of her cold dungeon cell. Sensing her sudden freedom, she astutely deduces that a truly major event must have triggered her immediate release. Exhausted from her brutal ordeal, she wisely decides to prioritize resting her severely battered body. A sudden quiet movement in the dim room gently interrupts her peaceful moment of solitary rest. Ruji abruptly steps forward from the shadows and generously offers to feed the weakened girl himself. Gazing down at her frail state, he notes with uncharacteristic gruff concern that she is still feeling incredibly rough. He quickly catches her bewildered stare and awkwardly asks what is wrong with the strange look on her face. Kira brightly admits her utter shock over how incredibly sweet and caring Ruji is acting toward her today. Visibly flustered by her pure gratitude, Ruji hastily orders her to eat her warm food and rest quietly. She warmly accepts the nourishing meal, allowing the comforting heat to completely soothe her battered spirit. Tears of overwhelming joy spill from Kira as she marvels at receiving such profound kindness from a terrifying demon. Startled by her sudden and intense emotional outburst, Ruji confusedly calls out her name in the quiet room. Her heart swelling with immense gratitude, Kira softly murmurs Ruji's name through her rapidly falling tears. She clumsily stumbles over her words, desperately trying to articulate the immense thankfulness bursting within her chest. The tender moment instantly breaks as Lord Urkus warmly enters the room to ask how Lady Kira is feeling. Pleasantly surprised by the unexpected visit, Kira respectfully greets the noble high priest with a soft, tired smile. She graciously thanks Lord Urkus, sincerely crediting his heroic intervention for her steady and gradual recovery. Urkus returns her warm smile, softly explaining that he came specifically to check on her overall physical progress today. Approaching with urgent news, Lord Urkus gravely informs Kira that there is something she absolutely needs to hear. He solemnly reveals that the sacred book of prophecy has completely burned away into nothingness. Shocked by the horrific revelation, Kira listens as he explains the ashes spelled out a warning about a grave mistake. Connecting the dreadful dots, she quietly murmurs that the ominous warning must certainly be about her. She guiltily assumes the supposed mistake refers directly to her forbidden contract with a dark demon. Interrupting her anxious thoughts, Urkus firmly clarifies that the grave error most likely concerns King Regulus instead. He explains that the terrible situation is severely misunderstood and the true mistake lies entirely with the monarch. Urkus confidently states his unyielding belief that unjustly imprisoning Kira was the catastrophic error mentioned in the ashes. Confused by the senseless cruelty, Kira quietly wonders why the king would do something so terrible in the end. Sighing deeply, Urkus explains the king harbors an abnormal hatred and obsession toward her stemming from past experiences. He astutely observes that Kira surprisingly seems to understand the deeply flawed monarch better than anyone else. Pressing further, he gently suggests she might be the only person truly capable of fixing the troubled king. Pondering the heavy burden, Kira hesitantly acknowledges the distinct possibility before her demeanor suddenly shifts. Furious at the mere suggestion, she viciously decides to completely screw his pathetic problems to hell. She fiercely declares she has absolutely no obligation to humor the king after the brutal suffering he inflicted upon her. Regaining her composure, she respectfully addresses Lord Urkus with a brand new sense of unwavering resolve. With absolute certainty, she calmly announces her finalized decision to permanently leave the suffocating palace. Moving with quiet purpose, Kira meticulously gathers her few belongings to prepare for her long-awaited departure. She swiftly dresses herself in fresh travel clothes while radiating an intense aura of newfound confidence. Fully prepared, she cheerfully declares that she is perfectly all right and completely ready to move forward. Stepping confidently through the grand halls, she begins her definitive march towards sweet freedom. Spotting her waiting friend, she brightly apologizes to Lord Urkus for keeping him waiting so long. Greeting her with a warm smile, Urkus happily notes that she looks completely set for her upcoming journey. Bowing gracefully, Kira expresses her profound honor at having the noble high priest personally see her off. Urkus admits his initial surprise at her departure but completely understands her choice after enduring such a horrific ordeal. Nodding in solemn agreement, she firmly states that the treacherous palace is simply not where she belongs. Looking toward the bright horizon, she proudly declares her unwavering intention to finally live freely on her own terms. She excitedly explains her ultimate plan to return directly to her Marquis to begin a brand new life. Offering his total support, Urkus smiles warmly and promises he is fully rooting for her future happiness. He politely gestures toward a lavish carriage specifically prepared to carry her safely away from the royal grounds. Suddenly, the peaceful atmosphere violently shatters as King Regulus aggressively blocks her path of escape. Staring him down with utter disdain, Kira sarcastically asks if he came out here to see her off too. She coldly addresses King Regulus directly without a single shred of her former fear or submissive respect. Trembling with uncontrollable rage, the furious king violently demands that she stop screwing around with him. He stares at her packed bags in sheer disbelief and desperately asks if she is truly leaving the palace. Unfazed by his intimidating presence, Kira boldly confirms her departure by stating she has the high priest's official permission. Losing all royal composure, the desperate monarch violently screams that he will absolutely never allow such a departure to happen. Recoiling in pure agony, he dreadfully realizes his precious control over her is rapidly slipping through his fingers. Frantically grasping at straws, he violently reminds her of the grand prophecy, explicitly stating she is fated to be his spouse. Completely unmoved by his pathetic desperation, Kira merely lets out a cold, mocking scoff at his final plea. Lord Urkus sharply questions the stunned monarch by loudly reminding King Regulus that he was the one who initially denied the truth. Stating the harsh reality, the high priest coldly declares the king is now completely free to make Lady Yuktya his queen since Lady Kira is no longer necessary. He ruthlessly explains that the sacred book of prophecy burned to ash specifically because the monarch's own foolish actions rendered the grand prophecy utterly void. Trembling with impotent rage, King Regulus violently clicks his tongue as the crushing weight of his catastrophic mistake bears down upon him. Having delivered the devastating truth, Lord Urkus politely excuses himself to leave the shattered king alone in his misery. Halting her departure, Lady Kira suddenly remembers there is one final crucial thing she absolutely needs to say directly to the king. Desperate attendants frantically hold the screaming king back by warning him that pushing the matter any further will only humiliate him entirely. A heavy, tense silence grips the massive hall as the strained monarch fiercely struggles against his unyielding guards. Turning back with absolute poise, Lady Kira clearly and loudly addresses the highly contested annulment of their royal engagement. She proudly smiles and confidently declares that she gladly accepts the permanent severing of their once fated bond. Delivering the final crushing blow, she cheerfully bids her former fiancé a permanent goodbye before decisively turning her back on the throne. Utterly devastated by her bold rejection, King Regulus agonizingly screams Kira's name into the echoing empty palace halls. The narrative abruptly shifts to a dark, secluded estate where a sinister new plot silently brews in the deep shadows. Shocked by the sudden report, Mark Mink loudly questions the unexpected news of Lady Kira completely abandoning the royal palace. A loyal subordinate smugly congratulates the Marquis by suggesting the grand engagement between the king and his daughter Lady Yuktya will now proceed exactly as planned. Marquis Mink remains ominously silent as his dark, treacherous thoughts begin to viciously spiral out of control. Simmering with deep-seated envy, he angrily recalls how the capable House Shandies was heavily favored by both the former king and the royal ministers. His bitter jealousy violently peaks as he remembers how the sacred prophecies specifically chose the Shandies' daughter to become the Grand Queen. A twisted scowl heavily contorts the treacherous nobleman's face as overwhelming resentment fiercely burns within his blackened heart. Clenching his fists in absolute fury, he viciously curses the overwhelming hatefulness of the entire sickening situation. Marquis Mink furiously admits he absolutely could not stomach watching his hated rivals arrogantly bask in the royal spotlight. Driven by pure malice, he proudly reveals how he meticulously moved from the shadows to completely tear their prestigious family down. Smiling wickedly, the corrupt Marquis gleefully confesses that he skillfully manipulated the naive king into passionately hating Lady Kira. He arrogantly mocks the foolish monarch for blindly following his manufactured hatred to unjustly imprison the innocent young woman. Descending into pure madness, the ruthless father casually admits he deliberately poisoned his own daughter to execute his master plan. He chillingly justifies his horrific abuse by stating he only administered enough poison to make Yuktya suffer badly without killing her. Calculating his twisted victory, he proudly notes that Yuktya becoming the undisputed queen was essentially guaranteed by his ruthless sacrifice. The treacherous Marquis bitterly laments how his supposedly perfect plan for Kira to die a miserable death has been completely derailed. Grinding his teeth in absolute rage, he viciously curses the meddling high priest for stubbornly sticking his nose where it blatantly does not belong. Refusing to accept her mere exile, Marquis Mink angrily declares he will never accept such a peacefully tame ending to his grand scheme. Radiating sheer murderous intent, the deranged nobleman violently vows to personally ensure Lady Kira meets a brutal and definitive death. The scene ominously cuts back to the royal palace where the deeply shattered King Regulus sits engulfed in total despair. Lady Yuktya gently approaches the brooding monarch and softly mentions hearing the shocking news of Lady Kira abandoning the palace. King Regulus remains entirely unresponsive as the heavy, suffocating silence of his immense regret completely crushes his spirit. Attempting to seize the sudden opportunity, the ambitious Yuktya slowly closes the physical distance between herself and the devastated ruler. Stuttering slightly, she nervously urges the deeply depressed king to simply forget about Kira and strictly look forward to their shared future. Clinging to his arm in a desperate display of affection, she falsely promises to always remain loyally by his side. Breaking his heavy silence, the exhausted king quietly murmurs Yuktya's name in a low, dangerously flat tone. Completely rejecting her calculated comfort, King Regulus coldly orders the stunned woman to immediately return to her private room. As Yuktya weakly attempts to protest, the broken monarch fiercely cuts her off with a singular commanding order to go away. Left entirely alone in the throne room, the broken King Regulus quietly agrees with the grim reality of his isolation. His troubled mind immediately fixates on his lost prize as he softly murmurs Kira's name. The obsessive monarch continues to repeat her name like a haunting mantra in the desolate hall. Gripping his face in utter despair, he agonizingly groans Kira's name one final time. Struggling to articulate his overwhelming possessiveness, he stammers helplessly to the empty room. A dark, twisted resolve suddenly overtakes him as he violently declares he has absolutely no intention of letting her go. Snapping back to his ruthless authority, he sharply calls out to a hidden royal assassin lingering in the shadows. A masked operative instantly materializes and kneels respectfully to acknowledge his master's sinister summons. King Regulus coldly orders the elite shadow to hunt down and immediately kidnap the escaping Lady Kira. His eyes widening with terrifying madness, he commands the guard to lock her away deep within an inescapable dungeon. Roaring with absolute tyranny, he demands his men completely strip away her freedom and ensure she never sees the sun again. The loyal subordinate bows deeply and promises to execute the horrific mission exactly as the king commands. A brief narrative pause signals the ominous conclusion of the Dark Palace schemes before shifting to a brighter horizon. Far away from the treacherous capital, a sturdy royal carriage steadily travels down a peaceful dirt road. Gazing freely out the open window, Lady Kira smiles warmly and happily remarks on the beautifully clear sky above. The gentle breeze playfully tosses her hair as she finally breathes in the sweet scent of true freedom. She cheerfully turns to her traveling companion and notes that it is absolutely perfect weather for a day like this. Feeling a deep sense of gratitude, she softly admits that she really should thank Lord Urkus for his immense help. She gratefully explains how the noble high priest generously arranged a comfortable carriage and personal guards for their journey. Sitting casually beside her, Ruji smugly chuckles and calls Urkus a fool for totally failing to notice a demon's presence. Kira lightly scolds the arrogant demon with a playful smile as their comfortable banter fills the moving carriage. Her expression softening into genuine affection, she softly calls out Ruji's name in the quiet space. Looking directly into his eyes, she boldly and sincerely confesses that she truly likes him. Taken completely off guard by her sudden bluntness, Ruji stares back at her in stunned absolute silence. He awkwardly reminds her that he is a literal demon, but Kira simply smiles and confidently states that she already knows. Ruji fondly recounts their entire journey together and gently asks if she is genuinely enjoying herself now. She emotionally reflects on how he completely affirmed her broken life despite being a terrifying supernatural creature. Tears prick her eyes as she remembers how his simple promise to feed her provided unimaginable support during her darkest hours. Staring deeply at her demonic savior, she internally vows that as a woman she truly cares about his well-being. Flashing a confident smirk, Kira playfully asks if she has finally become the exact kind of villainess he likes. Ruji cryptically deflects her question with a teasing laugh, leaving her to happily pout at his evasive response. The heartwarming moment violently shatters as a massive explosion suddenly blasts the ground directly in front of their carriage. Jolted violently in her seat, Kira screams out in absolute shock as the horses wildly panic. A barrage of deadly projectiles viciously slams into their armed escort, instantly throwing the peaceful journey into pure chaos. Springing into combat readiness, Ruji immediately shields Kira and urgently shouts for her to look outside. A ruthless band of masked assassins suddenly emerges from the dense tree line with their weapons drawn and ready. The surviving royal guards frantically draw their swords and loudly scream out a warning about the sudden raid. Evaluating the overwhelming enemy numbers, Ruji tightly grips Kira and fiercely orders her to get ready to run. Swallowing her returning terror, Kira nods firmly and bravely confirms she is completely ready to move. He rapidly instructs her to fiercely counter them if they break through before immediately escaping into the dense forest. A sudden violent shock violently interrupts the peaceful journey as a deadly ambush abruptly begins in the wilderness. Total chaos violently erupts across the dusty road as the royal escorts frantically draw their weapons to defend the carriage. A loyal knight urgently shouts over the terrifying din of battle to desperately ask if Lady Kira remains completely unharmed. Startled by the sudden terrifying explosion, Kira frantically calls back to the brave Sir Knight amidst the choking dust. She nervously confirms that they managed to survive somehow and anxiously asks about the physical condition of her dedicated guards. The exhausted knight grimly reports that they frustratingly let the agile enemy escape but suffered several badly wounded men. Pondering the attackers' true identities, Kira suspiciously notes they moved with the distinct precision of highly trained knights. A nervous carriage attendant hesitantly interrupts the tense battlefield debriefing to quickly deliver some truly devastating news. The frantic servant nervously explains that their crucial leather reins were intentionally severed and the frightened horses completely ran off. A battered guard urgently warns Lady Kira that they will be completely unable to travel any further by carriage now. The perceptive knight astutely deduces that since they lost the mysterious attackers, their ultimate target was definitely Lady Kira herself. He desperately begs her to quickly escape through the dense forest with the remaining mobile knights because staying remains incredibly dangerous. Understanding the grim reality of their vulnerable situation, Kira quickly agrees to the rapid retreat despite groaning from her lingering injuries. Overwhelmed by their selfless sacrifice, she tearfully apologizes and sincerely thanks the valiant guards for their unwavering absolute devotion. Fleeing for her very life, the desperate noblewoman plunges headfirst into the dark foreboding woods alongside her remaining protectors. Thick branches furiously whip at her travel clothes as she blindly sprints through the extremely dense and dangerous underbrush. A protective royal knight closely shadows her desperate escape and urgently asks if she is truly all right holding this intense pace. Gasping heavily for air, she weakly admits that running is incredibly painful since her battered body is honestly still recovering. Pushing past her extreme physical agony, she firmly resolves to just keep running until a hostile voice suddenly spots her location. A vicious masked pursuer violently orders his murderous comrades to rapidly converge and kill the highly targeted woman. Stepping bravely directly into the imminent line of fire, the loyal knight fiercely orders Lady Kira to immediately leave this deadly battle to them. He wildly swings his heavy steel sword to violently block an incoming lethal strike and desperately screams for her to go right now. Facing almost certain death, the highly honorable guard softly prays that ultimate good fortune may forever be with his fleeing master. Left completely alone in the increasingly dangerous woods, Kira forces her deeply exhausted legs to fiercely sprint even faster through the darkness. She frustratedly curses her unbelievably horrible luck for seriously running straight into the deadly middle of yet another terrifying ambush. Ruji suddenly shouts a frantic, desperate warning for Kira to immediately watch out for a brand new approaching threat. Multiple eerie voices menacingly chant Lady Kira's name from deep within the surrounding suffocating forest shadows. A sinister new masked figure abruptly blocks her desperate escape path and menacingly commands her to look this way. Paralyzed by pure sudden fear, she shockingly realizes this highly coordinated unit is an entirely different group from the last ruthless assassins. Ruji grimly identifies the extremely deadly newcomers as the notorious Palace Shadow unit directly serving the ruthless king. Horrified by the absolutely relentless pursuit, she angrily screams in total disbelief that King Regulus is still psychopathically obsessed with her. The elite royal assassins coldly and silently tighten their deadly tactical perimeter around the completely trapped young woman. Moving with utterly terrifying synchronization, the dark operatives perfectly block every single possible avenue of escape. A deeply suffocating silence heavily descends upon the dark forest as the deadly secret agents prepare their final decisive strike. The lead shadow assassin emotionlessly states that violently capturing Lady Kira is an absolute royal order originating directly from the king. He brutally declares their singular dark mission is to violently drag her back to the capital and permanently imprison her. With deeply unsettling and robotic calmness, the masked agent respectfully asks her to deeply understand that the king truly loves her. Revolted to her very core, Kira fiercely spits back that his completely twisted and violent version of love is absolutely disgusting. She furiously screams that if the pathetic king desperately wants to speak of love, he should come down here and kneel himself. Completely unfazed by her fiery, passionate defiance, the cold shadow operative ruthlessly proclaims that any further resistance is completely futile. Paralyzed by the suffocating realization that the king's tyrannical orders are absolute, Kira freezes in sheer unadulterated terror. Cornered by her undeniably grim fate, she desperately concludes she would rather embrace death than be kept like mere livestock by that monstrous man. Driven to the absolute brink of despair, Kira resolutely decides she would rather throw her own fleeting life away than surrender to subjugation. Violent, uncontrollable tremors mercilessly rack her frail body as the sheer paralyzing horror of her impending doom finally takes full hold. Tears streaming down her devastated face, her primal survival instinct violently shatters her previous resolve as she screams that she absolutely does not want to die. A heavy, suffocating silence falls over the perilous cliffside as the emotional weight of her desperate plea echoes endlessly into the gaping abyss. Shattering the unbearable tension, Ruji suddenly and sharply commands Kira to jump directly into the treacherous depths looming below. Startled by this seemingly insane directive, Kira gasps in pure confusion, staring wildly at her protector in complete disbelief. Meeting her panicked, trembling gaze with a stoic and unwavering resolve, Ruji demands her absolute and unquestioning trust. Time seemingly grinds to a halt as the two desperate fugitives stand perfectly still on the razor's edge between life and impending death. Roaring with a fierce, defiant fury, Ruji boldly orders their heavily armed pursuers to deliver one final explosive message to King Regulus. He fiercely bellows for the tyrannical king to go straight to hell, permanently sealing their rebellious, inescapable fate. Emboldened by his fiery conviction, Kira boldly declares she is going with Ruji, plunging herself forward into the great unknown. Finding an unbreakable well of courage in his steadfast words, she completely trusts him and wholly surrenders to the terrifying freefall. The heart-stopping, gravity-defying plummet dramatically concludes the chapter, leaving their highly perilous escape precariously hanging in the balance. A haunting, heavily ominous voice violently pierces the surrounding darkness, chillingly calling out to Lady Kira from the shadows. The immense, suffocating threat looms heavily in the turbulent atmosphere, casting a terrifyingly dark shadow over their desperate flight. A chaotic, blinding blur of violent motion erupts as their relentless pursuers aggressively close the distance with undeniably deadly intent. Realizing the rapidly deteriorating and highly dangerous situation, a tense voice grimly mutters that things have taken a disastrously bad turn. Surging adrenaline violently fuels their panicked bodies as they scramble frantically to evade the imminent and deadly threat of capture. The frantic high-stakes chase reaches an explosive boiling point, brutally pushing their physical limitations to the absolute breaking edge. A sudden, intensely pained grunt violently escapes as a brutal physical impact immediately threatens to completely derail their frantic escape. Panicking uncontrollably at the sudden spike in danger, Kira desperately screams Ruji's name into the chaotic, unforgiving void. They plunge violently into the raging ice-cold waters below, becoming completely enveloped by the undeniably violent and crushing surge. The crushing, merciless current immediately threatens to aggressively drown them in a swirling, inescapable vortex of unforgiving river rapids. A massive explosive splash violently erupts into the air as they struggle desperately against the overwhelming might of the roaring river. Submerged deeply in the icy depths, they fight tooth and nail with everything they possess just to break the turbulent, suffocating surface. Gasping desperately for precious life-saving air, a breathless cry violently breaks through the roaring cacophony of the rushing, turbulent water. Panting heavily and looking utterly exhausted, Ruji desperately commands a frantically hyperventilating Kira to forcibly calm her highly erratic breathing. Fighting the violent thrashing surge with all his might, he firmly orders her to hold on incredibly tight to him for sheer survival. Ruji urgently and fiercely warns Kira that drifting aimlessly downstream will lead them straight into the waiting hands of the searching enemies. Defying all conceivable odds, he fiercely declares their only viable path to survival is to aggressively fight their way directly upstream. Plunging fiercely back into the desperate struggle, another heavy splash loudly echoes as they aggressively push against the ferocious river current. Looking up in utter soul-crushing despair, they instantly realize the heavens have opened up to bring relentless rain at the worst possible time. Kira mentally crumbles under the overwhelming adversity, bitterly questioning the sheer cruelty of the gods and how much further they must physically endure. Snapping her violently back to harsh reality, Ruji intensely reminds her that she chose him precisely because the gods were never on her side. Radiating an aura of fierce, unbreakable protection, he loudly and passionately promises to keep her completely safe from any harm. With absolute, unyielding urgency, he passionately commands Kira to swim forward with every single ounce of strength she has left in her body. Staring deeply and intensely into his fiercely determined eyes, a renewed spark of powerful defiance brilliantly ignites within her battered, exhausted spirit. Mustering the absolute last ounce of her dwindling courage, she quietly but firmly agrees, fully committing her soul to their highly desperate fight for life. Stirring from her terrifying ordeal, Kira lets out a soft groan as consciousness slowly begins to return. Drifting in a hazy liminal state, she helplessly floats through fragmented memories of their desperate escape. The chaotic flashes of rushing water and imminent death vividly haunt her deeply exhausted subconscious. Crying out in her troubled slumber, Kira desperately calls out Lisby's name into the quiet emptiness. Clinging to the fading remnants of her dream, she passionately declares her eternal desire to stay together always. A gentle reassuring sensation suddenly grounds her as she softly murmurs in peaceful sleepy comfort. Snuggling into the soothing embrace, Kira blearily notes the unexpected and deeply comforting warmth surrounding her. Slowly opening her heavy eyelids, she struggles to fully comprehend her unfamiliar and dimly lit surroundings. Breaking the tranquil silence, Ruji's calm and steady voice gently asks if she is finally awake. Snapping into absolute panic, Kira violently screams in sheer shock as she realizes her highly vulnerable state. Ruji casually explains that discovering this abandoned cabin while washed up downstream was an incredible stroke of luck. Frantically scrambling for cover, she wildly demands to know exactly what happened and why she is completely naked. Sighing in mild exasperation, Ruji mutters about her dramatic reaction while calmly preparing to silence her frantic outburst. Moving with sudden and inescapable speed, he firmly presses his lips against hers to abruptly halt her panicking. Shocked by the deeply intimate gesture, Kira lets out a muffled gasp against his warm, silencing kiss. Pulling away gently, she breathes heavily as the overwhelming surge of pure adrenaline slowly begins to subside. Staring intently into her wide eyes, Ruji quietly asks if she has managed to calm down yet. He firmly instructs her to remain perfectly still, explaining that they desperately need to warm up her severely chilled body. Still thoroughly bewildered, a deeply flustered Kira stammers out a confused question about their highly compromising situation. A tense, heavy silence settles between them as the gravity of their harrowing survival fully sinks in. Suddenly spotting a brutal gash on his torso, Kira violently gasps and points out Ruji's severe bleeding wound. Horrified by the gruesome sight, she instantly realizes he sustained the brutal injury while fiercely protecting her earlier. Brushing off her frantic concern, Ruji quickly dismisses the injury and immediately asks if she is all right. Attempting to reassure her, he confidently states that a demon's formidable biology should instantly heal such a minor wound. A sudden wave of dark realization washes over his face as he grimly mutters that things have fundamentally changed. Staring blankly at his unhealing flesh, Ruji solemnly confesses that he has completely broken a sacred demon taboo. He reveals that a high demon acting out of pure attachment to a mere human is considered an utterly unforgivable sin. Trembling with dawning horror, Kira asks if his divine punishment is the direct reason for his current weakened state. Looking her directly in the eyes, Ruji plainly admits that he has completely stopped being a demon and became human. Bitterly lamenting his newfound physical frailty, he apologizes for his incredible inconvenience and inability to instantly heal the wound. The crushing weight of his monumental sacrifice hangs heavily in the air as Kira processes the utterly life-altering revelation. Noticing the sudden heavy stream of tears cascading down her face, Ruji gently asks why she is crying. Sobbing uncontrollably, a deeply guilt-ridden Kira endlessly apologizes because his devastating transformation happened entirely because of her. Cupping her tear-stained face, he fiercely reassures her that acting on his own accord to keep her alive was enough. Still struggling to accept his monumental sacrifice, Kira stammers through her tears to helplessly question his completely selfless logic. Holding her gaze with unwavering intensity, Ruji rhetorically questions why he would ever feel such a profound dedication. Without a single ounce of hesitation, he passionately and openly declares his deep, unconditional love for her. He tenderly professes his absolute adoration for her pride, her choices, the way she lives, and even her darkest sins. Embracing his fragile new mortality, Ruji fiercely vows to walk alongside Kira and live with her until the day he dies. Completely overwhelmed by his incredibly powerful confession, Kira whispers his name as she fully surrenders to his profound love. Basking in the gentle aftermath of their survival, Kira tenderly agrees that she also wants to stay with him forever. Looking deeply into her eyes, Ruji earnestly suggests they carefully think through their shared future together. Finding deep comfort in his unwavering resolve, a highly exhausted Kira softly agrees to his thoughtful proposal. A warm, flickering lantern gently illuminates the quiet intimacy of their rustic, isolated wooden hideout. Shattering the previous tranquility, a furious noble violently scolds his heavily armed subordinates for carelessly letting Kira escape. The highly nervous subordinate frantically explains that the Royal Shadow's unexpected interference severely complicated their capture mission. He grimly reveals to his enraged master that the mysterious Royal Shadow is also actively hunting Lady Kira. The enraged noble furiously complains that the king's lingering obsession with Kira is a massive insult to his daughter Yuktia's royal destiny. Boiling with intense, murderous rage, he viciously commands his men to find the little girl no matter the terrifying cost. The furious nobleman viciously vows to forcefully put a filthy end to the tyrannical king's deranged and dangerous obsession. He aggressively commands his lethal assassins to permanently sever the king's twisted attachment to the elusive fugitive. A dark, heavily armored assassin silently and ominously acknowledges the ruthless, bloodthirsty execution order. Miles away in the quiet cabin, Ruji grimly assesses that their beloved villainess is currently being hunted by two entirely distinct factions. He ponders aloud about the highly dangerous true identity of the mysterious second faction relentlessly pursuing them. A sudden, overwhelming wave of pure shyness completely overtakes Kira as she violently blushes in the dim light. Her exhausted face turns a deep crimson as she awkwardly fidgets under the incredibly heavy weight of their recent intimacy. Noticing her highly erratic and flushed behavior, a genuinely confused Ruji gently calls out her name in the quiet room. Startled violently back to reality, a deeply flustered Kira frantically stammers a chaotic and incredibly unconvincing denial. Leaning in uncomfortably close, a deeply concerned Ruji earnestly asks if she is suddenly running a dangerous fever. Panicking uncontrollably at his sudden physical proximity, Kira wildly flails and frantically begs him to wait a moment. Completely overwhelmed by sheer, unadulterated embarrassment, she rapidly stammers for him to immediately keep his physical distance. Her racing mind completely short-circuits as she loudly and awkwardly declares her sudden inability to form coherent words. She desperately tries to explain that their incredibly passionate intimacy has her entirely mentally and emotionally compromised. Completely bewildered by her explosive and chaotic physical reaction, Ruji loudly demands to know what is actually wrong with her. Violently slapping her own flushed cheeks, Kira fiercely commands herself to snap out of it and hyperfocus on survival. Returning to the grim, unforgiving reality of their situation, Ruji solemnly reflects on the highly dangerous second enemy faction. Kira fiercely agrees that they must violently uncover the enemy's hidden identity to prepare for their next desperate move. A sharp, highly cunning glint flashes in Ruji's intense eyes as he boldly declares he has a dangerous strategic plan. Back in the dangerous wilderness, a brutal commanding officer fiercely orders his heavily armed search party to pay strict attention. He violently commands them to thoroughly scour the riverbank since the turbulent current should have washed Kira ashore nearby. The heavily armored, ruthless thugs aggressively comb through the dense, unforgiving brush in their relentless, bloodthirsty pursuit. A sudden, sharp realization violently strikes a roaming soldier as he aggressively locks onto a highly suspicious target in the foliage. He maliciously and triumphantly snarls Kira's full noble name upon discovering her incredibly vulnerable hiding spot. The triumphant thug viciously shouts to his ruthless comrades that he has successfully cornered their highly precious prey. Cornered and seemingly entirely helpless, a highly terrified Kira desperately begs the aggressively advancing thugs to just stop. Shattering the tense standoff, an intensely furious Ruji emerges from the dark shadows with a chillingly lethal verbal command. Radiating pure, unadulterated menace, Ruji violently lunges forward to brutally intercept the rapidly advancing attackers. A devastating, blindingly fast physical strike violently cleaves through the tense air as Ruji mercilessly dispatches the immediate threat. Standing incredibly tall amidst the brutal carnage, the fiercely protective demon firmly shields Kira from the encroaching violence. A deadly, suffocating aura of pure, unbridled violence radiates from Ruji as he prepares to completely annihilate the remaining hunting party. Celebrating their tactical victory, Kira gleefully cheers that their clever decoy plan was a massive success. Bound and utterly defeated, the captured thug furiously curses them out as his resistance completely crumbles. Looming menacingly over his captive, Ruji glares down with an intense and unyielding aura of pure intimidation. Grabbing the thug fiercely, Ruji ruthlessly demands that he spill every single dark secret he knows. Absorbing the grim intel, Kira slowly realizes their relentless pursuers were deployed directly by the treacherous house of Marquis Mink. Nodding confidently, Ruji reveals he successfully forced their battered captive to violently cough up even more crucial information. Utterly stunned by the shocking revelation, Kira gasps loudly as the horrifying truth finally comes to light. Ruji grimly confirms that the infamous poisoning incident was entirely orchestrated by the ruthless Marquis Mink. He explains the sinister scheme was violently driven by deep-seated jealousy toward House Shandy's and Kira herself. Horrified by the sheer cruelty, Kira angrily condemns the monstrous man for ruthlessly poisoning his own daughter. Burning with righteous fury, she fiercely declares her intense desire to expose this twisted truth in broad daylight. Ruji coldly grounds her expectations by pointing out that exposing a powerful noble without solid proof will be incredibly tough. Suddenly struck by a brilliant strategic thought, Kira brightly notes a massive upcoming opportunity to strike back. She reveals that King Regulus, Princess Yuktya and Marquis Mink will all attend the rapidly approaching founding anniversary party. Kira passionately devises a daring plan to force the Marquis to publicly confess in front of a massive crowd. Acknowledging the extreme danger, Ruji nervously sweats and admits that pulling off such a public trap is a remarkably tall order. Urging immediate action, Ruji commands them to quickly board the stolen enemy carriage because they cannot safely linger here. The commandeered carriage violently rumbles into motion as they set their immediate course for the Shandy's market. Glancing at their bound captives, Kira asks if they should bring them along to violently squeeze out more intel later. Stealing his intense focus, Ruji firmly announces their dangerous entry onto the highly exposed main road. The stolen carriage loudly clatters down the desolate dirt path as they race desperately against the encroaching threats. Suddenly, a massive explosive force violently erupts directly in their perilous path. Thrown violently off balance by the brutal impact, Kira unleashes a terrified scream as the carriage aggressively rocks. Clicking his tongue in pure frustration, Ruji wildly scans their chaotic surroundings to identify the sudden threat. A massive, heavily armed enemy blockade suddenly materializes as Ruji grimly realizes they were drastically outmaneuvered. A ruthless commander aggressively draws his shining blade and violently vows that Kira Vishandy's will never escape. Shielding her with his own body, Ruji fiercely commands Kira to immediately get back from the encroaching danger. Igniting his explosive fighting spirit, he passionately swears to ruthlessly protect her no matter the physical cost. The bloodthirsty assassins violently charge forward with their deadly weapons raised high in the tense air. Bracing for the brutal impact, Ruji defiantly readies himself to completely slaughter the overwhelming wave of attackers. Before the brutal clash can even begin, a mysterious and highly powerful force suddenly intervenes in the chaotic battlefield. Panicking at the rapidly escalating violence, Kira desperately screams Ruji's name into the chaotic fray. A massive, heavily armored thug violently lunges forward with a bloodthirsty roar to strike the fatal blow. A booming, incredibly authoritative voice violently shatters the battlefield tension by demanding the ruthless attack cease immediately. Charging gloriously into the brutal fray, an elite heavily armored cavalry violently announces themselves as the Shandy's Ritter Knights. Overwhelmed by the miraculous rescue, Kira gasps loudly as absolute shock washes over her exhausted face. Spotting a highly familiar and commanding figure at the vanguard, she tearfully cries out for her brave father. Ruji stares in sheer amazement as the highly coordinated military force completely turns the dangerous tide of battle. The elite House Knights violently clash against the terrified assassins with overwhelming and unstoppable martial prowess. The devastatingly powerful cavalry charge violently scatters the enemy forces as the majestic Shandy's banner flies proudly overhead. The ruthless attackers freeze in sheer panic as they desperately question the unexpected arrival of an opposing force. The fierce commander proudly declares this is their territory and they came to violently drive off the reported bandits. Discovering his precious daughter among the chaos, the seasoned nobleman fiercely glares at the encroaching enemies. Burning with protective fury, he violently demands to know what the thugs intend to do to Kira. Drawing his gleaming weapon, he fiercely vows never to forgive the insolent wretches for their crimes. A tense and suffocating silence violently blankets the battlefield as the two opposing forces prepare to brutally clash. The elite knights aggressively surge forward with blinding speed to annihilate the terrified assassins. A devastating shockwave violently erupts as the master swordsman brutally cleaves through the enemy ranks. Watching the overwhelming martial display, Ruji calmly notes that her father possesses absolutely insane swordplay. Kira proudly confirms her father is renowned throughout the entire country as a peerless master swordsman. The overwhelming might of the Shandy's knights mercilessly crushes the remaining resistance with brutal efficiency. Trembling in absolute terror, the battered enemy commander stammers helplessly as his forces completely crumble. Realizing their total defeat, the desperate thugs violently scramble backward while screaming for a full retreat. The battlefield finally falls silent as the heavily armored knights secure the blood-stained perimeter. Sheathing his majestic weapon, the imposing nobleman slowly turns his absolute focus toward the weary survivors. Breaking into a desperate sprint, the worried father frantically calls out Kira's name across the battlefield. Answering his frantic call, she quickly confirms she is all right despite the grueling ordeal. Kneeling before her, the relieved nobleman deeply apologizes for the immense suffering she endured in his absence. Tears violently swell in his intense eyes as the heavy emotional toll of their miraculous reunion sets in. Overwhelmed by sheer emotion, Kira passionately cries out to her father as she violently throws herself forward. He bitterly explains the treacherous king forcefully sent him away on a distant expedition to leave her completely vulnerable. Weeping tears of profound joy, she fiercely reassures him that everything is fine now that they are finally reunited. Rising to his feet, the protective father warmly commands his beloved daughter to finally come home. The imposing noble procession confidently reorganizes itself to escort their precious young lady to absolute safety. The grand carriage aggressively rumbles down the winding road as they make their triumphant return to the family estate. Gazing upon the majestic mansion, a wave of deep nostalgia washes over Kira as she finally makes it back. Sitting in the grand parlor, the serious nobleman gently calls out his daughter's name to begin their grim discussion. He calmly confirms that the elite house guards have successfully taken full custody of the captured prisoners. Leaning forward with intense focus, he fiercely demands to know what in the world is truly going on. Though he plans to brutally interrogate the captives, he gently requests that Kira recount the entire harrowing tale. A heavy silence violently settles over the room as Kira solemnly prepares to reveal the deeply horrifying truth. Absorbing the grim revelations, the stoic father quietly mutters his complete understanding of the perilous situation. He bitterly deduces that multiple sinister factions are violently swirling together around the corrupt king's dark ambitions. Bowing his head in deep sorrow, he sincerely apologizes that she was unfairly caught up in such a dangerous web. Shifting his intense gaze, the observant nobleman gently brings up one final lingering mystery. Staring directly at the stoic young man, he firmly asks Kira to explain his true identity. Suddenly engulfed in pure panic, a heavily flustered Kira stammers helplessly as she struggles to form a coherent answer. Her mind frantically races as she internally panics over how to subtly explain that Ruji is actually a formidable demon. Noticing her extreme discomfort, the understanding father gently asks if the mysterious truth is too difficult to share. Radiating absolute paternal warmth, he fiercely vows to remain on her side regardless of whatever dark secrets she carries. Looking up with intense emotion, Kira softly calls out to her imposing father. Standing tall and formidable, Marquis Kaizam Vaishandis patiently awaits his daughter's crucial explanation. A heavy and highly anticipatory silence violently settles over the grand parlor room. Stepping forward boldly, Ruji introduces himself as a former demon who obtained a human body to walk through life alongside Kira. Stunned by the brazen declaration, the bewildered Marquis softly echoes the shocking phrase as he processes the truth. Meeting the nobleman's intense gaze, Ruji passionately declares his unwavering love and fiercely vows to protect Kira forever. Blushing a deep crimson, Kira firmly adds that the brave young man is someone incredibly precious to her. She earnestly explains that Ruji's steadfast presence gave her the absolute strength to face her unbelievably cruel fate. Deeply moved by her raw emotion, Kaizam gently and lovingly whispers his precious daughter's name. Gathering her resolve, Kira passionately pleads with her father to listen to the harrowing tale of everything they survived. Miles away in the royal palace, a highly furious King Regulus violently curses in pure unadulterated frustration. Slamming his fist aggressively, he wildly demands to know why his elite forces cannot locate his elusive prey. A terrified subordinate hesitantly suggests the grim possibility that Lady Kira was already swept away by the raging river and died. Exploding with murderous rage, the tyrannical king viciously orders the guard to shut up or face an unforgivable execution. Shattering the terrifying tension, a frantic messenger violently bursts into the throne room with an urgent tactical report. The breathless scout quickly reveals that a violent skirmish occurred between the hunting faction and the Marquis's formidable military forces. He nervously adds that the Marquis's highly trained knights successfully and brutally repelled the desperate attackers. Delivering the final crushing blow, the messenger reports that Kira was safely taken into protective custody by her powerful family. Letting out a heavy and terrifying sigh, King Regulus darkly processes the deeply frustrating intelligence. A suffocating and intensely malicious aura violently swirls around the obsessed monarch as he schemes his next dark move. Back at the secure estate, Kaizam questions his men about the captured attackers but learns the thugs remain stubbornly tight-lipped. Radiating absolute authority, the Marquis fiercely orders his subordinates to aggressively press the captives and hurry the interrogation. Sitting quietly in a moment of profound realization, Kira softly murmurs that she finally understands the dark truth. Staring grimly into the distance, she coldly concludes that the tyrannical king's twisted obsession is not truly directed at her.